Hello everyone, I'm the Creeps Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. When I think back to my childhood, there are certain memories that sit like heavy stones in my stomach. They're memories that I don't really talk about with anyone, not even my parents, even though they were the ones who made the decisions that led to what happened. I don't blame them for it. They didn't know. No one really knew, except the people who should have told them. But I think about it sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet and I'm alone in my room, and I feel that same heavy feeling that I felt as a little girl, without even understanding why I felt it back then. I was in elementary school, maybe around 9 years old. Our house was an old colonial house with white siding and dark shutters. It had been built to look like it came straight out of the late 1700s. My parents were obsessed with keeping it historically accurate. They even picked out paint colors that were approved by the Historical Society. The wood floors were these soft old planks that creaked no matter how lightly you stepped, and the windows had those thin glass panes that made everything look wavy when you looked outside. It was beautiful, but it was also old and small for our family, so my parents decided they wanted to add on to it. They planned a big addition off the back of the house with a new living room, a sunroom, and a big porch looking out over the yard. I remember when they hired the first contractor. He was this gruff man with a beard and a baseball cap who always looked like he was chewing something. He had a team with him, and they started tearing up the yard to pour the foundation. But after that, things just stalled. He and my parents fought all the time. I didn't hear the details because they tried to keep it away from us, but I knew there was something about painting the wood trim. My parents wanted all the wood painted to match the colonial style, but the contractor didn't want to paint over the expensive wood they bought. It went on for months, then a year, then over a year. They kept paying him, and he kept showing up with his team, but the work barely moved forward. There was just dirt and wood and trash all over our backyard for so long that I almost forgot what grass looked like back there. Eventually, my parents fired him. I remember them sitting us down one evening to tell us the construction would finally be moving again because they found a new contractor through their lawyer. He was from their lawyer's church, so they felt like they could trust him. He came by the house once, a smiling man in a tucked-in polo shirt, shaking my dad's hand in the driveway. But after that, he never showed up again. Instead, he sent his team. The team was a bunch of men who, to my 9-year-old eyes, looked mostly the same. Tall, strong, wearing dusty jeans and boots and faded t-shirts with sweat stains. They came early in the morning when the grass was still wet and the air was already heavy and sticky. The summers in our town were brutal. The heat pressed down on you until your hair stuck to your neck and your skin felt slippery all the time. My mom, being the kind woman she is, always made lemonade in a big glass pitcher. She would pour it into paper cups and send me outside to give it to the workmen because she said I needed to be helpful and kind to people. So I did. Every morning I'd carry out a tray with cups full of lemonade, beads of water sliding down the sides, and walk across the creaky wooden deck to where the men were working. They would always thank me, ruffling my hair or smiling and nodding before going back to hammering and sawing. Sometimes I sat on the steps and watched them work. I liked watching the walls go up, seeing the empty space behind our house slowly turn into something real. One of the men was named Kenny. I didn't know that at first. I just knew he was the one who talked to me the most. He was tall and thin with sandy hair and a crooked smile. He always wore a ball cap and had sunglasses hooked into his shirt collar. One day I was sitting there, holding the empty tray, and he looked at me and said, "Hey kiddo, what's your name?" I told him, and he told me his was Kenny. He said I could call him that whenever I saw him. After that, I always said hi to him first. He wasn't the boss, but he seemed to be in charge when the contractor wasn't there, which was basically all the time. He asked me about school sometimes, what grade I was in, what subjects I liked. I remember I told him about this book I was reading about a girl who wanted to be a vet, and he listened like he really cared. He asked if I liked animals, and I said yes. He said he liked animals too. He would always say things like, "You're such a sweet kid," and pat my shoulder before going back to work. I didn't think anything of it. He was nice to me, nicer than most grown-ups were to kids. I felt proud when he smiled at me, like I was important. Construction went on for years. I didn't realize it at the time, but 2.5 years is a long time for an addition. By the time they finished, I was almost in middle school. I didn't see Kenny after that. I just figured he went back to working on other houses. Our house was finally done. The backyard was clean again, and the new sunroom smelled like fresh paint for months. Life went back to normal. I focused on school and friends and didn't think about construction anymore. Then one morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal before school. My dad was reading the newspaper. He always read it before work while drinking his coffee. I remember I was trying to make the little marshmallows in my cereal line up by color when my dad made this noise, like he choked on his coffee. I looked up, and he was staring at the newspaper with this look on his face I had never seen before. His mouth was open, but no words came out. My mom asked what was wrong, and he just shook his head. Then he stood up so fast his chair almost fell over, grabbed the phone off the counter, and walked into the laundry room, shutting the door behind him. I didn't know what was happening. My mom walked over to the table and looked at the newspaper where he had been staring. She read it silently, her hand covering her mouth. I asked her what it said, but she didn't answer. She just walked away, her eyes glazed over like she wasn't even seeing me. Later that evening, I overheard them talking in their room. Their door was cracked open, and their voices were low but tense. I stood in the hallway, pressing my back against the wall, listening. My dad said Kenny's name. He said he couldn't believe it. He said Kenny had been arrested for it. I didn't understand the word back then. Pedophilia. I didn't even know what that meant. I heard my mom whisper that he had been on a list before he worked at our house, but no one told them. I didn't know what list she meant, but I knew it was bad. My dad said the contractor knew, but didn't think it was necessary to tell them. I remember my mom saying, in this tiny broken voice, "We left her alone with them. We left her alone." I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough to feel sick. I went to bed that night with my mind spinning. I thought about every time I went outside with lemonade. Every time Kenny smiled at me or patted my shoulder. Every time he called me sweet. I remembered one time when I was sitting on the steps watching him nail boards into place. He looked back at me and said I could come watch closer if I wanted, but I told him no because the hammering was too loud. He just laughed and said okay, but in my head that memory twisted and churned until it felt rotten. For days after, I felt like my skin didn't fit right on my body. I felt like something invisible and dark was stuck to me. I didn't want anyone to touch me, not even my mom. I didn't tell anyone that I felt that way. I just stayed quiet. I went to school and did my work. I watched TV with my brother after homework. I ate dinner and brushed my teeth and went to bed. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smile. I saw the way his eyes looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I felt my stomach tighten and twist, and I didn't know why I felt like crying when he never did anything to me. Years later, when I was old enough to really understand what he did, what he was arrested for, I realized how close I could have come to being one of his victims. I realized that my parents had left me home alone with him and his team more times than I could count. I realized that the only reason nothing happened to me was luck. Just dumb luck. Or maybe because someone else had already been his victim and he wasn't going to risk it again. I don't know. I don't think about it too deeply because when I do, I feel like I might throw up. Sometimes I still think about the smell of sweat and sawdust and fresh-cut wood in the hot summer air. I think about the sound of hammers and drills and the low hum of men talking while they worked. I think about that lemonade pitcher sweating in my hands as I carried it across the porch and how I felt proud to be helpful, proud to be trusted to do something for the grown-ups. I think about how I didn't know anything back then, how I just wanted to be a good kid. And I think about Kenny's smile, and I feel sick all over again. I'm an adult now. I live in a small apartment far away from that old colonial house. My parents sold it years ago when they retired. But sometimes when I visit them in their new house, I see my mom looking at me with this sad, guilty look in her eyes. I know she's thinking about that summer too. I know she's thinking about how close it came to being worse. We don't talk about it. There's nothing left to say. It happened. It didn't happen. Both are true in different ways. All I know is that when I have kids of my own one day, I will never, ever leave them alone with anyone I don't know. I will never assume someone is safe just because other people trust them. Because I learned early that the scariest people in the world aren't ghosts or monsters hiding in the woods. They're the ones who stand in your backyard in broad daylight, smiling and building your house while you bring them lemonade, thinking they're just another grown-up doing their job, thinking you're safe. Because you never really know who's standing right in front of you. And that's the scariest thing of all. I was never really into hunting. My dad, uncles, and older cousins were all obsessed with it. It was almost like a ritual for them every winter, packing up all the camo gear and rifles, driving out into the woods at 4 in the morning, drinking burnt coffee from metal thermoses, and spending hours in the freezing air waiting for a deer to show up. I was maybe 11 or 12 when they first decided I was old enough to come along. I remember waking up to my dad shaking my shoulder before the sun had even thought about rising, and my first thought was, I don't want to go. But I didn't say it. I never said no to him back then. I just pulled myself out of bed, teeth chattering, and got dressed in the camo pants and jacket he'd bought me the week before. I remember the smell of the truck that morning, too, like cigarettes and coffee and something sour that always seemed to linger in the seats. Everyone was quiet on the drive, sipping from their steaming mugs and staring out at the dark road. I had my Game Boy in my pocket and a whole bunch of batteries in my backpack, which was really the only thing that made me feel okay about going out there. I knew I could at least sit and play Pokemon if I got bored, and I always got bored. When we got to the woods, it was so cold I felt like my bones were freezing. The trees were bare, and everything was wet with dew. They gave me a little orange radio to clip onto my vest, and told me I'd be sitting in one of the ground blinds by myself for the morning. I didn't care about that. I just nodded and followed my dad as he walked me through the undergrowth, my feet sinking into the soft dirt with every step. We reached the blind after about 20 minutes of walking. It wasn't really anything special, just a small canvas tent-like structure with a slit in the front where you could look out and shoot. He told me to keep my eyes open and let them know if I saw any deer moving through. Then he ruffled my hair and walked off into the trees. I watched him go, the forest swallowing him up until I was left alone with the sound of my own breathing. I climbed into the blind and sat down on the little folding chair they'd left inside. There was a rusted thermos half full of something rancid in the corner, probably from the last person who sat there and forgot it. I didn't touch it. I just pulled out my Game Boy, clicked it on, and lost myself in Pokemon for what felt like hours. At some point I started to get tired of grinding. I remember clearly I was fighting Zubats in some cave over and over, just pressing them mindlessly until I felt my eyes drooping. I turned off the game and stuffed it back into my bag, deciding I'd grab another game to play for a while. I started digging through the backpack, pulling out old candy wrappers, a crushed Capri Sun, some extra gloves, the pack of batteries, and a lighter I'd swiped from the kitchen counter without thinking. I was rummaging through everything when I heard this sound. It was like a whoosh, a really quiet, low whoosh that seemed to come from right outside the blind. At first I thought it was the wind. I paused and listened, trying to hear if the trees were swaying above me. But everything was silent except for that soft whoosh sound coming from right behind the blind. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my back. I didn't want to get up and check it out, but curiosity got the better of me. I climbed off the chair and unzipped the flap on the side so I could step outside. The cold air hit me hard, but I ignored it and walked around the blind. The ground was muddy and my boots sank into it with little squelching noises. I walked slowly around the back, my breath coming out in short, foggy puffs. As I turned the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. The entire back wall of the blind was covered in spiders. I didn't even realize at first what I was looking at. It just looked like a black, writhing mass stuck to the green canvas, shifting and moving with tiny little jerks. But then I focused my eyes and saw hundreds, maybe thousands, of those thin-legged, fragile daddy long-legged spiders, their bodies pressed together in a giant clump that stretched from the top of the blind down to the muddy ground. I felt my knees go weak. My heart was pounding in my chest so loud I could hear it in my ears. The whole wall was alive, like it was breathing. I could see the spiders on the edges crawling around the ones in the center, their thin legs twitching and reaching out like feelers. For a second, all I could think about was running, just turning around and sprinting into the woods, away from that horrible wall of spiders. But then the fear turned into something else, panic mixed with anger. I didn't want to run. I wanted them gone. I wanted to kill them all. I looked down at the can of off-bug spray clipped to my backpack, and then at the lighter I'd been fiddling with earlier. The idea popped into my head like it had always been there, waiting. I pulled the can out, flicked open the lighter, and held it in front of the nozzle. I took a deep breath, feeling my chest tighten with terror, and pressed down. The flame shot out like a little homemade flamethrower, catching the edge of the spider mass. The smell hit me first, a sharp, bitter stink of burning hair and something else, something wet and rotting. The fire spread fast, the whole cluster lighting up in an orange flash. I felt a moment of sick satisfaction as I watched them burn. But then I realized my mistake. The wind shifted, blowing towards me. And that's when it happened. The spiders all let go at once. I don't know if it was the fire or the smell or the heat, but they released their grip on the blind in a single horrible motion. The mass broke apart, and the next thing I knew they were flying at me. Hundreds of tiny burning spiders flying through the air, their legs curling up, their bodies twisting in little flaming arcs. I opened my mouth to scream and felt something hot and brittle hit my tongue. I spat it out and screamed again, my voice tearing at my throat. They hit my chest, my arms, my face. Tiny sparks of pain burst everywhere they touched. I fell backwards into the mud, dropping the can and lighter, and started rolling on the ground, trying to brush them off. Some of them were still alive, crawling over my skin, their legs pricking at me even as their bodies burned. I ripped off my jacket and threw it into the mud. My shirt came off next, then my boots, then my pants. I didn't care. I didn't care about anything except getting them off me. My entire body was covered in goosebumps and burning welts. I could smell my own singed hair mixed with the rancid smell of burnt spider. I grabbed the radio with trembling hands and pressed down the button, so hard it clicked. I didn't even think about what to say. Words just poured out, broken and ragged, swearing and sobbing, telling my dad to come get me right now, telling him we were going home, telling him I didn't care about the hunting trip anymore. I was done. I was so done. I sat there in the mud, completely naked except for my socks, hugging my knees to my chest. I could still feel them on me, even though they were all gone. My skin felt like it was crawling with 1,000 tiny legs, each one pricking and tickling, making my stomach twist with nausea. I sat there shivering, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they'd crack. I didn't even look at the burning blind behind me. I just stared down at the mud between my legs, trying not to throw up from the smell. It felt like forever before I heard my dad's voice calling out. I didn't respond. I just sat there shaking. When he finally found me, he didn't say anything. He just stared at me with wide eyes, taking in my burned skin, my muddy body, the ruined blind behind me still smoking with the smell of burnt canvas and spiders. He wrapped me up in his jacket and walked me back to the truck in silence. I remember his arm around my shoulders felt so heavy, like he was holding me down instead of comforting me. I didn't go hunting again after that. I didn't even go into the woods for years. Therapy helped a little. They told me it was normal to have lingering trauma after something like that my fear of spiders was rational considering what had happened. But even now, as an adult, if I see a daddy long legs in the corner of my room or crawling across the bathroom floor, my chest tightens up and I feel like I can't breathe. I know they can't hurt me. I know they're harmless. But all I see is that wall of twitching legs and the memory of their tiny burning bodies flying at me through the cold morning air. I don't hate hunting because of the animals anymore. I just don't want to ever be out there again, away from home, away from safety, sitting in some blind surrounded by things I can't see or control. Every time I think about it, my skin crawls and my stomach twists with that same cold fear. And that's why I hate spiders. That's why I'll never go back into the woods again. I never liked visiting my grandfather's company offices when I was a kid. Even the main city ones felt cold and rough, filled with men in dusty boots, oil-stained uniforms, and stacks of hard paperwork about timber lots, mining claims, and wages for villagers who worked long hours for almost nothing. But I remember one day, years ago, when my uncle told me about a certain office that never opened. He said my grandfather bought a big old house to turn it into an office in a small country far away. A place where the roads weren't paved, and the main street had only chickens, goats, and people carrying bundles of sticks on their heads. I didn't think much of it until I heard the whole story years later from a family friend who used to work for my grandfather. It stayed in my head forever after that. They had been expanding timber and mineral operations deeper into that country's interior. Cheap land, cheap labor, old-growth forests, and hills lined with iron and stone. My grandfather wanted a quick local office, so managers didn't need to drive 6 hours to the capital city for every little issue. His staff found a big 2-story house in a small, dusty town. It was strangely cheap even for that region, just a fraction of what land should cost there. The village elders warned them not to buy it. They said the house was cursed and haunted. My grandfather didn't care about ghost stories from villagers. He grew up poor and built his business from nothing. He thought only fools believed in curses. To him, bad luck was just bad management. So they bought it. It was large and solid, built decades ago by a rich family who owned nearby land before they mysteriously died off. Thick stone walls, a red-tiled roof, big carved wooden doors, and dark heavy windows that shut tight against monsoon rains. My grandfather's project manager, a man named Warren, went down there with his wife and 3 kids. The plan was simple: set up a small office on the ground floor, use the upper floor as the family residence, and start local hiring to get operations running within 3 months. When Warren and his family first arrived, the villagers avoided them. They kept their distance, only looking from far away, muttering to each other. Warren didn't care. He told his workers to carry the furniture up to the 2nd floor: old teak beds, wooden trunks, heavy armoires, and arranged simple desks on the ground floor for the office. The village kids didn't come close to play or watch like they usually did with new foreign families. The wife tried to smile at them from the balcony, but they scattered like frightened birds every time. At first, Warren sent in weekly reports. They were short and businesslike, talking about transport costs, a local foreman's demands, and the poor condition of roads leading to the forest logging sites. Then his report stopped. My grandfather assumed it was a power outage or broken phone lines. This was common in remote areas. A week passed, then 2 weeks. Still no news. My grandfather finally asked another local staff member to check in person. When the man arrived in the village, the people there didn't want to go near the house. He told my grandfather that no lights had been seen in the windows for days. My grandfather called the local police and told them to go inspect the place. He didn't tell them what he suspected, just ordered them to report back immediately. Hours later, the police called. Their voices were shaking. When they reached the house, they had to break down the front door. Inside, the rooms were silent, dark, and smelled like rotting meat mixed with metal. Blood had dried into dark stains across the entire ground floor. It dripped down the staircase like paint. They found the family upstairs. There were no survivors. Warren had killed his wife and 3 children with a machete. Not a gunshot wound, not poison, not sleeping pills, a machete. The report said he hacked them all down, even his youngest, only 4 years old. The bodies weren't arranged neatly either. They lay twisted, hacked open, covered in blood and bits of flesh. The walls were sprayed with long arcs of blood. Even the ceiling was splattered, so high that people later said it looked like the blood was thrown there by angry spirits tossing the bodies around the room. But the truth is, when you hack someone open with a blade, blood pressure makes it spray upward with each strike. It made sense to me when I read the autopsy reports years later, but I can't imagine what it looked like in person. What made it even worse was what he did after. He somehow barricaded the door from inside. The bed, an enormous carved wooden bed with his dead wife and children on it, was shoved against the door so hard that the police had to ram it repeatedly to open the room. No one understood how he moved it. It took 4 men to shift it back later for the bodies to be removed. After killing his family, Warren turned the machete on himself. He cut deep, not just on his wrists or neck. He slashed into his chest, hacking through flesh and ribs like he was possessed by rage or madness. His last wounds were self-inflicted chest wounds, so deep they almost split his ribcage. The machete was still in his hand when they found him, his body folded over it. People said no human could kill themselves like that. They said it was a magic machete possessed by spirits. Some even claimed the villagers cursed him. But to me, it was simple. Isolation does things to a man's mind. He was cut off from everyone, in a place where locals hated them, living in a house with a history of death, surrounded by silence and jungle noises each night. You start seeing things. You start believing your own fears. I think he went mad. My grandfather was furious, but not for the reasons you'd think. He didn't care about ghosts or curses, but this was a business disaster. He bribed the local police to classify the deaths as natural causes despite the scene. In that country, bribes weren't hard if you handed them to the right person. They wrote up reports calling it an unfortunate health incident or a mass suicide without details. My grandfather forced all employees who knew to sign non-disclosure agreements. The company could not afford this scandal to reach newspapers in the capital, let alone international media. Dead foreign workers and their murdered children don't make a company look good, especially when you're already paying off environmental fines left and right. He still wanted that office open. A month later, after the house was cleaned out and the bodies buried quietly, he told his managers to find another volunteer to finish the setup. Even though he kept details hidden, everyone knew the previous project manager died there. No one volunteered. Finally, he singled out a man in accounts, gave him a sudden promotion, and told him he was now in charge of opening that branch office. The man quit the next day without even collecting his severance. Years later, the house still stood there, empty, windows boarded up, weeds growing waist-high around the gates. The villagers never went near it again. I heard they said spirits of the family still cried at night inside. Personally, I think the only spirits in that house were the ghosts inside Warren's own mind. The madness of being alone in a place that hated him. The weight of that darkness was enough to push any man over the edge. But the house remained, a silent monument to what isolation and fear can do to a man, and to how sometimes the real horror has nothing to do with ghosts at all. I never really told people about what happened that night when I was 7 or 8. It's one of those memories that feels like a blurry nightmare, but I know it was real because even now, after so many years, it still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. I remember it was winter because I had gone to sleep wearing my thick cotton pajamas with small cartoon cars printed on them, and my bed had that heavy dark blue blanket that smelled faintly of fabric softener and old wood. My room was never warm in winter. It always had a chill, even when the rest of the house felt fine, and that night was no different. I had gone to bed earlier than usual because I was feeling tired after school. I remember coming home and watching TV on the living room carpet, and then Mum called me for dinner. I didn't even finish my plate that night. I think it was chicken curry with rice, the kind of food I usually loved, but I was so tired I just picked at it. My dad asked me if I was feeling sick, and I told him no, just tired, so he told me to brush my teeth and go to bed early. I remember brushing my teeth that night while staring at myself in the bathroom mirror with half-closed eyes, thinking about how cold the tiles were under my feet. After brushing, I went straight to my room, turned on the small yellow lamp on my bedside table, and switched on my little black radio. I always kept the radio on at night because it made me feel like I wasn't alone. The soft voices of the radio hosts, the songs, the adverts, they all made the darkness seem less empty. I climbed into bed and pulled the blanket up to my chin, turning to my side and looking at the window. The curtains were shut, but a little bit of light from the street lamp outside always crept in from the edges, giving the room a dim glow. I closed my eyes and listened to the radio, waiting for sleep to pull me under. I don't know how long I had been asleep when the banging started. At first, I thought I was dreaming it. The sound felt like it was part of the dream I was having, but as I opened my eyes in the darkness, I realized it wasn't a dream. It was real. There was a banging noise coming from my window. It wasn't a constant banging like someone knocking over and over again. It was like a single heavy bang, then silence, then another bang. My first thought was that it was the wind. The wind used to make strange noises against my window, especially on stormy nights. I lay there with my eyes half open, staring at the curtains, telling myself it was just the wind and I should go back to sleep. But then I started hearing something else. At first, I thought it was the house creaking, like it always did when the wood settled or when the temperature dropped. But the more I listened, the more I realized it wasn't random creaks and pops. It was footsteps. Very soft, slow footsteps. They weren't coming from outside my room or down the hallway. They were coming from inside my room. My room was quite big for a kid's room. You could easily walk in circles in front of my bed without bumping into anything. I had my bed pushed up against the far wall. Then there was a big empty space with a thin brown carpet. And near the door I had my small wooden table with my school books and crayons scattered on top. I had a tall wardrobe near the window and a little shelf with some books and toys. The footsteps sounded like they were walking around that open space, moving slowly in circles, never getting too close to my bed, but never stopping either. Just circling. My body felt frozen. I was lying on my side, facing the window, with the blanket pulled up to my eyes. I tried to tell myself it was just the house making noises. That's what adults always said, that houses made noises at night when the air got colder and the wood contracted. But I knew the difference. I knew what it sounded like when the house creaked. and what it sounded like when someone walked across a carpeted floor. And these were footsteps. Soft, slow, careful footsteps. I could hear my radio playing a song. It wasn't a happy song. It was slow and sad, with a man singing in a low voice. I don't remember the words, and I don't even remember the name of the song. But every time I hear it on the radio these days, it makes my stomach twist. Back then, that song made everything feel worse. The sadness in the man's voice, the slow melody, it all added to the fear that was crawling up my chest and tightening around my throat. I remember trying to move my fingers first. I wanted to get up and run to my parents' room, but I felt like if I moved, whatever was making those footsteps would notice me. I stayed still for what felt like forever, my eyes wide open, staring at the dim outline of my curtains. I could feel the cold air in my room on my face. It felt colder than usual, like the temperature had dropped suddenly. My teeth started to chatter slightly, and I pulled the blanket up higher. The footsteps kept going, slow and heavy, circling and circling. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest, I thought I was going to throw up. I tried to listen harder to see if maybe it was just my imagination, but every time I thought the footsteps stopped, I would hear them again, shifting across the carpet softly. Then I felt something change in the room. It was like the cold suddenly got deeper, like someone had opened a freezer right next to me. I could see my breath when I exhaled, small puffs of white mist floating in front of my face. My whole body was shivering under the blanket. My legs felt stiff and weak at the same time, like they didn't want to move. I remember thinking that if I didn't run now, I would never be able to run. That thought pushed me. I threw the blanket off me and jumped out of bed. My bare feet hit the cold carpet, and I ran towards the door. I had to cross that open space to get to the door, the same space where the footsteps were circling. As soon as I ran into that space, it felt like I had stepped into ice water. The cold wrapped around me, swallowing me up. I froze for a second because it felt like I couldn't breathe. My breath came out in thick white clouds in front of me, and for that moment, everything felt silent except for my own shaking breaths. Then I heard a sound. It was a voice, but it wasn't loud. It was a whisper, quiet but clear, right next to my ear. I couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman. It just said two words. I'm lost. That's all it said. I'm lost. The voice didn't sound angry or scary. It sounded sad, like someone was crying silently while speaking. But in that moment, it was the scariest thing I had ever heard in my life. I didn't wait another second. I bolted out of my room, down the hallway, past the dark bathroom and the closed door of the storage room, until I reached my parents' bedroom at the end of the hall. I didn't knock or call out to them. I didn't even care if I woke them up. I opened their door so fast it hit the wall with a loud bang, and I crawled under their bed. I don't know why I went under the bed instead of climbing in with them. Maybe I thought that if I hid under there, whatever was in my room wouldn't find me. I curled up under their bed, pressing my knees to my chest, and I cried silently. I remember my tears feeling hot on my freezing cold face. I lay there listening to my parents breathing softly as they slept, feeling the warmth of their room slowly wrap around me, making my shivering slow down. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep under there, because the next thing I remember was waking up in the morning to my dad's voice calling my name. He was kneeling on the floor next to the bed, his face filled with confusion as he asked me why I was under there. I didn't answer him. I just crawled out and hugged him tightly. He laughed and ruffled my hair, telling me I must have been sleepwalking again. I didn't say anything about the footsteps or the voice. I didn't say anything about how I saw my breath in my room or how cold it felt. I just hugged him and nodded like I believed I had been sleepwalking. That day, I went to school like normal, but I was quiet all day. I kept thinking about those two words. I'm lost. The voice didn't sound like it wanted to hurt me. It just sounded lost, sad, and alone. But even now, as an adult, I still can't make sense of it. There are nights when I wake up suddenly, and for a moment I feel like I'm back in that room, staring at those curtains with my breath coming out in white mist. On those nights, I turn on my lamp and sit up for a while, listening to the house, making sure I only hear the normal creaks and pops of wood cooling down, and not the soft, slow footsteps of someone walking in circles. I moved out of that house when I was 12. We shifted to a new city because my dad got transferred for work. I remember packing up my room and feeling a strange relief, like I was finally leaving something behind. But the memory never left me. Even now, when winter comes and the nights get cold, I think about that night. I still sleep with the radio on sometimes, But whenever a sad, slow song comes on, I quickly switch the station because I can't stand that feeling rising in my chest again. I never told my parents or my friends about it. I never told anyone. It's one of those things that you keep locked up inside because saying it out loud makes it feel real again. But I know what I felt that night. I know how cold it got. I know what I heard. And I know I wasn't imagining it. Even though I never saw anyone in my room, I know I wasn't alone that night. And maybe I'll never really understand what happened, but I'm okay with that now. As long as it stays in the past, as long as I never hear those footsteps again, I'm okay with never finding out who said those words to me in the dark. When I was about 13 or 14, I lived on a farm in North Carolina. It wasn't really a farm the way people think when they hear that word. There were no big wide fields of beans or cotton or corn. It was a pine tree harvestry. Rows and rows of longleaf pines lined perfectly, straight as rulers, stretching out in every direction. Pine needles were a big landscaping thing back then. People would come and bale up the pine straw every year and sell it off to garden stores. Our house sat right in the middle of those 550 acres of pine trees. That was my whole world at the time. Just trees, sky, dirt roads, and the old weird house. The house was strange. Some dentist built it in the 1930s. It wasn't like other farmhouses you'd see in Carolina, all simple and square. Ours had strange corners and long rooms and angles that didn't make sense. The living room was the strangest part of it. It had this huge picture window that stretched nearly the entire length of the room, about 50 feet long. It looked out over the pine trees, with the ground sloping down away from the house because the house sat on a small rise. So when you sat in the living room, you were 5 or 6 feet above the ground, looking down and out into the forest. You could see a solid mile of pines in front of you. It always felt unsettling. In the winter, when the ground had a thin layer of snow or slush, the moonlight would reflect, and everything outside glowed faintly silver. You could see the dogs running around at night, just dark shapes moving across the glowing ground. I hated that room. I hated that window. It made me feel small and watched, like the forest was staring at me instead of the other way around. One weekend, I had a cousin over. We were bored and restless the way kids get in the country, especially when it's cold outside. We sat around throwing stuff in the fireplace to see what would happen. Bits of paper, pine needles, small pieces of plastic we found under the couch. Anything that would burn or melt and look weird. The fire was dying down, and we decided to build a kingdom out of couch cushions and blankets in the living room. We set up our sleeping bags and pillows and lay down to watch the last orange bits of flame flicker into darkness. It was late, and the house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall and the shifting noises that come from an old wooden house cooling down for the night. The air felt heavy, like it always did when the fireplace sucked all the warmth from one room and left the rest of the house cold. We lay there, me staring at the ceiling, my cousin looking out the window. I didn't think much of it at first. The window was just black glass with a faint reflection of us and the room. But then the dogs started barking. The barking was faint at first, coming from far off in the woods. Our property stretched for nearly a mile, and sometimes the dogs chased raccoons or deer through the pine rows, barking and yipping as they ran. I didn't think anything of it at first. I just lay there, listening to them barking and thinking about how cold the floor felt through my sleeping bag. But my cousin kept staring out the window without blinking, and that started to make me feel uneasy. He didn't say anything for a long time, just stared. Finally, I asked him what was up. He didn't answer right away, just kept staring out at the trees like he was trying to see something far away. Then he said he felt like he was seeing things. I sat up, suddenly anxious, and turned to look out the window with him. I felt my heart thumping in my chest, my ears ringing a little from the silence of the room and the distant barking of the dogs. For a long time, we didn't see anything. Just the endless rows of pine trees, the moonlight glinting off the thin crust of snow and ice on the ground. The trees cast long black shadows across the white ground, and my eyes kept trying to make shapes out of them. I asked him again what he saw. He shushed me, leaning forward like he was trying to push his eyes out into the forest. I felt annoyed and scared at the same time. My stomach felt hollow. Then we both saw it. A shadow moved from one tree to another. It wasn't running or leaping. It was just walking. A brisk walk, like someone out for a purpose, moving from the trunk of one pine to the trunk of the next. It was about 100 yards out from the house. We couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, just a shape, dark against the paler snow. My mouth went dry, and I felt goosebumps rise all over my arms. We both sat there frozen, not blinking, not breathing, watching the spot where the shape had vanished behind the tree. We didn't freak out right away. At that point, there was still a chance that we didn't see what we thought we saw. My brain tried to tell me it was a branch moving in the breeze or the shadow of a deer walking past. Anything that made sense. Anything that wasn't a person walking through our trees in the middle of the night. We just sat there staring, waiting. My cousin didn't say a word, just pressed his face closer to the glass, fogging it up with his breath. A few minutes later, it happened again. But this time, it was about 50 feet from where we first saw it. Another shape, another tree, just a few strides, and then it was gone behind the trunk. My chest felt tight, and I could hear my heart thumping in my ears. I wanted to wake up my dad, but he was the type of man who would grab his rifle and go outside yelling into the woods, and I was too scared for that. I didn't want to poke at whatever was out there. I just wanted it to go away on its own. We kept watching. Every few minutes, we saw them again. Two shapes, appearing and vanishing, moving between the trees. Sometimes they were closer, sometimes further away, but always there, moving with purpose. My eyes started to ache from staring so hard into the darkness. The room felt too big around us, and the window felt like a wound cut open in the side of the house, letting the night look straight in at us. There weren't any neighbors nearby. The land around our farm was owned by federal paper back then, just miles and miles of uncultivated pine forest. You didn't see people around our house unless they meant to be there. Strangers didn't just wander through those trees in the middle of the night, not miles away from the nearest road. The only tracks on our land were ours, the dogs, deer, and foxes sometimes. Not people. Never people. We sat there for half an hour, watching those shapes appear and vanish, holding our breath each time, our eyes straining against the dark glass. Then, finally, one of the shapes appeared closer to us, just at the edge of the tree-line near the house. It didn't vanish behind a tree. It stood there for a moment, and then it started running towards us. It didn't sprint with wild energy. It ran with calm intention, arms pumping, feet pounding the frozen ground. I couldn't see its face, only the dark blur of its shape against the glowing snow, but I knew it was looking at us. Something inside me broke free then. My cousin and I scrambled up, falling over blankets and cushions, and we ran down the hall to my dad's room. We woke him up, shaking him and whispering frantically. He groaned and sat up, rubbing his face, asking us what was going on in his sleepy, angry way. We dragged him into the living room, but when we got there, the yard was empty. Just the silver snow and black trees, still and silent. The dogs had stopped barking. My dad shook his head and told us to lock the doors. He didn't even check outside. We ran from door to door, turning locks, sliding bolts, pulling curtains closed. Each door felt like a gamble. My hands shook so hard I could barely grip the cold metal knobs. Every time I turned a lock, I expected a hand to grab me through the crack, fingers closing around my wrist. But nothing happened. The doors locked, the windows closed, the curtains pulled shut. My cousin and I convinced my dad to sleep in the living room with us that night. He lay down on the couch and fell asleep quickly, snoring softly, while we sat side by side on the floor, staring out at the darkness beyond the glass until the sky turned pale with dawn. The next morning, my cousin and I went out to look. The snow was thin and crunchy with ice, but footprints were everywhere. They crisscrossed between trees, long strides, clear impressions of boots. Some came close to the house, and then we saw the ones right up against the wall beneath the window. Whoever it was had stood there, right under the window ledge. They would have been only 7 feet below, where we sat staring out into the forest. We never would have seen them standing right under us. I imagined them looking up at me, smiling or not smiling, just watching, waiting for something. I don't know who it was or why they were there. My dad never called the police. He believed in taking care of things himself. That was his way. We never saw those shapes again, but for months after that, I felt watched every time I sat in the living room. I kept my eyes on the window, always searching the dark spaces between the trees, waiting to see a shadow moving from one trunk to another. Even now, so many years later, when I think about that house, I don't remember the warmth of the fireplace or the smell of pine needles. I remember that window, the cold moonlit snow, and the shapes walking calmly between the trees in the middle of the night where no one should have been. I still remember the smell of that house. It was old, wooden, and warm, a place full of things collected over decades. We were living with my grandparents back then. Their house had squeaky wooden floors, faded rugs, and quiet corners where light seemed to disappear. My room was down the hall from my aunt's room. Her door was always open, and every time I passed it, I felt like something was looking straight at me. In her room stood that doll. It was about 2 feet tall, dressed like a tiny Victorian child, with pale plastic skin and painted blue eyes that never blinked. Its hair was thin and straw-colored, tied with a dusty blue ribbon. Its tiny pink lips were curved into a fixed smile, a smile that felt too wide for its small face. But it wasn't just a doll. Someone, maybe my aunt or her dad, had turned it into a lamp. The way it worked was strange. You had to grab its cold plastic hand and lift its arm upwards to turn it on. Then, to turn it off, you lowered the arm back down. The first time I saw it turn on, I remember feeling a wave of something dark roll over me. The bulb was hidden inside its chest, so when it lit up, it almost looked alive, glowing from its heart. At night, when my aunt slept with it on, its small face and white dress would glow faintly orange in the dark, and it stood on her nightstand next to her bed, facing the door, greeting everyone who entered with that dead-eyed smile. It was mid-afternoon when it happened. The sun was shining through the big front windows, making soft shadows of the lace curtains on the floor. My grandparents were out shopping for groceries, and my parents were at work. I was alone in the house. I had been sitting on the living room couch, watching TV with the volume turned low, so I could hear the house sounds. Every tick of the old kitchen clock sounded loud in that silence. I remember feeling hungry, but I didn't want to go into the kitchen because it was right next to my aunt's room. The doll lamp always made me feel watched, but I was cold, so I decided to get a blanket from her closet. She had thick, warm blankets stacked there, and I didn't want to use the thin couch throw. As I stood up from the couch, I remember thinking that it was broad daylight, and I was being stupid for feeling scared. I walked slowly down the hall, feeling my socks slipping slightly on the smooth floor. I saw her open door ahead, and I stopped just before entering. I told myself, it's just a doll, it can't move, it's just plastic and cloth and wires. The blanket closet was right next to the door. I didn't need to walk far inside. That was my plan. I would go in quickly, keep my eyes down, grab the blanket, and leave. I stepped into her room with my head lowered. The rug in her room felt softer under my feet compared to the wooden floor of the hallway. I could smell her floral perfume in the air. I didn't want to see the doll's eyes. I kept my gaze stuck on the carpet pattern as I walked in and turned around to face the closet. Now the doll was behind me. My back was turned towards it. I could almost feel its small painted eyes boring holes into my back as I reached for the closet handle. I pulled open the closet door, and it let out a short squeak. My heart was beating faster. I bent down to grab a thick red blanket from the lowest shelf. That's when I noticed it. The room felt different. Brighter. Warmer. At first, I thought maybe the sun had come out from behind a cloud, but then I realized it was the lamp. The doll lamp was on. Its light cast an orange glow against the closet door frame and spilled faint shadows on the carpet near my knees. For a few seconds, I froze. I didn't breathe. I felt the tiny hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. My skin crawled with the feeling of being watched, being hunted, almost like something was about to jump on my back. I wanted to run. Every single nerve in my body told me to drop the blanket and just bolt out of the room screaming. But something in me said I needed to see it. I needed to look, to confirm what my body already knew. I slowly turned my head over my shoulder. My eyes moved first, catching the orange glow in the dim room. Then my head turned fully, and I saw it. The doll's small plastic hand was raised in the air, pointed straight at me. Its dead blue eyes stared right into mine. Its stiff smile felt wider than ever in that light. For a moment, I forgot how to move. My legs felt locked in place. My stomach clenched so tight I thought I might throw up right there on her carpet. I couldn't understand how the lamp turned on. I hadn't touched it. No one else was home. The windows were closed. There was no breeze, no movement that could have lifted its arm. My brain started whispering quick explanations to keep me sane. Maybe the arm was loose and had fallen upwards on its own. Maybe the base was tilted and gravity made it lift somehow. But the doll's hand wasn't just raised. It was pointed directly at me, as if it was trying to single me out, calling me out, telling me I was seen. I took one slow step backwards, blanket clutched to my chest, then another step, never taking my eyes off its plastic face. When my heel touched the hallway floor, I turned and ran down the hall. I didn't stop until I was back in the living room. I threw the blanket on the couch and sat down hard, breathing in shallow gasps. My hands were shaking. I kept glancing down the hallway to make sure the doll hadn't somehow followed me. It sounds stupid, I know, but at 13, your mind doesn't always know what's real and what isn't. All I knew was that I felt hunted, marked by its stare. For the rest of the afternoon, I sat curled up in that blanket on the couch, watching the sunlight move across the carpet as time passed. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't touch my phone. I just listened to the house creak around me, imagining the doll standing there with its hand raised, glowing in the empty room. Every time the fridge made a clicking noise or the water heater let out a soft groan, my heart jumped in my chest. I was waiting to hear the sound of tiny footsteps on the wooden floor, or the faint squeak of its plastic joints moving down the hallway. When my grandparents came home, I pretended to be asleep on the couch. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want them to laugh at me or worse, tell me to go turn it off myself. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart thumping with every shift of the old house. I imagined the doll standing in my doorway, its arm raised, its eyes locked on me as I lay frozen under my blankets. I kept thinking about how cold its hand felt, that one time I had to turn it on when my aunt asked me to. Cold and smooth, with small fingers curled stiffly like a child holding nothing. Days passed, and I avoided her room completely. If I needed anything, I would wait for someone to come home, so I wasn't alone with it. Even then, I would walk past her room quickly, eyes fixed on the floor, feeling that burning stare on the back of my neck every time. A week later, my aunt moved out to her new apartment, and she packed up the doll lamp with her other things. I watched her carry it down the hallway, its head bobbing slightly with every step, its eyes catching the light and seeming to follow me even as it left the house. I felt a heavy knot loosen in my chest as she carried it out the front door. But the memory of it stayed behind, settled deep in my bones. Even now, years later, I still see its pale, smiling face in my dreams. Sometimes I wake up in the dark, sure that I can see it standing in the corner of my room, hand raised, pointing at me in the silence. I have to flick on my bedside lamp just to prove to myself that it isn't there. But deep down, I know what I saw that day was real. That moment burned itself into my mind forever. Every detail. The smell of old carpet and floral perfume, the feeling of cold plastic eyes on my skin, the warm orange glow spilling across the floor, the icy hand raised straight at me. It was just a doll lamp, plastic and wires. That's what I tell myself even now. But my body remembers it differently. My body remembers the way the room went still and heavy, the way the air felt thick in my chest, the way my legs almost gave out under me. My body remembers it as something alive, something watching, something that wanted me to see it. And that memory has never left. It has stayed there, tucked away in a quiet part of my mind, ready to crawl back out whenever the room goes too silent and dark. That day changed something in me. It taught me that fear isn't always about ghosts or monsters lurking in the shadows. Sometimes, it's about things that stand completely still, smiling and silent, making you question what's real and what isn't, and leaving you forever haunted by something as simple as a raised plastic hand in the glow of a doll lamp. I woke up that morning feeling restless. My body felt heavy from sleeping on the hard floor of my small apartment. The heat was already creeping in, even though the sun was just rising. I stretched my legs and rubbed my eyes. My back cracked when I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out. It was still quiet outside. The road was empty, the sky was orange and pale blue, and the air smelled dry and dusty. I drank some water from the bottle near my mattress. My mouth felt like sandpaper. I didn't bother eating breakfast. There wasn't much in the kitchen anyway, just half a packet of biscuits and a cup of instant noodles. I put on my old black joggers and a thin t-shirt. I decided to go for a run to clear my mind. I tied my shoes and left the apartment. The hallway smelled like paint and damp cement. I walked down the stairs quickly, not wanting to breathe it in too much. When I stepped outside, I felt the cool breeze hit my skin. It felt good. The road was silent. only a few birds chirping from the electric wires above. I started running slowly, my feet hitting the uneven cement path. I ran past closed shops and empty tea stalls. The stray dogs lying in the shade barely lifted their heads to look at me. I kept running until I reached the edge of town where the road turned into dirt. There was a narrow trail that led towards the hills in the distance. I always liked running here. It felt like I was leaving everything behind. I followed the trail for a while, breathing in the smell of dirt and grass. I could hear insects buzzing and small birds fluttering in the bushes. The ground was cracked in some places and damp in others where water had collected from the last rain. I kept running, feeling my breath getting heavier, sweat rolling down my face and neck, soaking into my shirt. The sun was rising fast now, and the cool breeze was fading. After about 40 minutes, I stopped running. I bent over with my hands on my knees, catching my breath. My heart was beating fast and loud in my ears. I stood straight and wiped my forehead with my shirt. I looked around. I realized I had gone deeper into the trail than usual. There were bushes and small trees on both sides. The trail kept going, curving into a cluster of thicker trees ahead. I thought about turning back, but something made me want to keep going. I walked slowly into the trees. The air felt cooler inside. The leaves blocked most of the sun, and shadows stretched across the dirt. I kept walking, listening to my footsteps crunching over dry leaves and twigs. I could hear a faint sound of running water somewhere deeper. I followed it, moving carefully around thorny bushes and overgrown roots. After about 10 minutes, I found a small stream running between the trees. The water was clear, with smooth stones underneath. I squatted down and splashed some on my face. It felt cold and fresh. I drank a little and stood up, feeling better. I decided to sit there for a while. I found a large rock near the stream and sat down. I looked around. Everything was silent except for the faint gurgling of water and the occasional rustle of leaves. The trees were tall and thin, their branches swaying lightly in the breeze. I could smell damp soil mixed with the smell of old fallen leaves rotting in the shade. I sat there for about 15 minutes, thinking about nothing, just staring at the water and breathing slowly. My legs felt sore from running, but it was a good pain. After a while, I stood up and started walking back towards the trail. I moved slowly, looking at the trees and the ground as I walked. I wasn't in a hurry. I felt calm. As I walked back, I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the dirt, coming from the direction I was heading towards. They looked fresh, pressed deep into the damp soil. They weren't shoe prints, though. They looked like bare feet, and they were big, much bigger than my own feet. I stopped and looked around, suddenly feeling tense. The footprints were facing towards me, as if someone had been walking in my direction. I kept walking slowly, following the trail. The footprints continued for a while, then suddenly turned left into a cluster of bushes and disappeared. I stood there for a few seconds, listening. The forest was silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and heavy. I didn't like this feeling, but I forced myself to keep moving. As I walked past the spot where the footprints turned, I glanced into the bushes. There was nothing but dry branches, fallen leaves, and thorny plants. I walked a bit faster, feeling my breathing get shallow. I just wanted to get back to the open trail and run home. I walked for about 5 minutes when I suddenly heard a sound behind me. It was a rustling sound, like someone stepping on dry leaves. I froze. My heart started pounding hard. I turned my head slowly and looked back. The trail behind me was empty. The trees were still, only a few leaves shaking in the breeze. I stood there for a while listening. Nothing moved. I felt sweat dripping down my back. My hands were shaking a little. I turned and started walking faster. My feet were crunching over the dirt and leaves loudly. After a few seconds, I heard the sound again. This time it was louder, like someone walking quickly over the dry ground. I stopped again and turned around. There was still nothing there, just trees and bushes and shadows. I couldn't hear any birds now. Everything felt silent and heavy. I started walking again, almost jogging now. I kept glancing behind me every few steps. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. My chest felt tight and my mouth was dry. I was sweating all over, my shirt sticking to my back. I kept moving faster and faster until I could see the opening of the trail up ahead where the trees ended. I was almost out when I heard a sudden loud snap of a branch behind me. My heart jumped in my chest. I turned around quickly. I saw movement between the trees about 20 feet back. Something dark moved behind a thick tree trunk. I couldn't see what it was, but it was tall, taller than any person I had seen. I stood there, frozen, my eyes staring at that spot. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then I saw it again, a dark shape moving from one tree to another, closer to the ground this time. It moved fast and silently. I felt my knees go weak. I turned around and ran. I ran as fast as I could, my feet slipping on the dirt and leaves. My breath was ragged, my chest burning. I didn't look back. I just ran towards the open trail, the sunlit dirt road beyond the trees. When I burst out of the trees, I almost fell forward from running so fast. I kept running down the trail, away from the forest, until I reached the dirt road. I stopped there, bending over with my hands on my knees, gasping for breath. My whole body was shaking. Sweat was dripping onto the dry ground beneath me. I turned around and looked back at the trail. The trees were silent, swaying gently. I couldn't see anything moving. I stood there for a long time, staring into the trees. My heart was still beating fast, and I felt like throwing up. I wiped my face and turned towards the town. I started walking back, my legs feeling weak and shaky. I kept looking over my shoulder every few seconds, but nothing followed me out. The road was empty, silent except for the sound of my footsteps crunching over the dirt and small stones. When I finally reached the edge of town, I felt my body relax a little. I walked slowly past the closed shops and tea stalls, past the stray dogs sleeping in the shade, past the empty vegetable carts lined along the footpath. My feet felt heavy, like they were made of stone. My breathing was still uneven, and I felt a sharp pain in my side. I reached my apartment building and climbed up the stairs slowly. My legs were trembling with every step. I reached my door and unlocked it with shaking hands. When I stepped inside, I closed the door behind me and locked it twice. I stood there for a few seconds, leaning my head against the door. My eyes were burning with sweat. I walked to the sink and splashed water on my face. My reflection in the small mirror looked pale, with dark circles under my eyes. My hair was sticking to my forehead. I took off my shoes and shirt and lay down on the floor, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above me. My body felt heavy and tired, but my mind was racing. I kept thinking about what I saw in the forest. That dark shape moving between the trees, silent and fast. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, maybe a big dog or a wild boar. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't. I had grown up seeing stray dogs, goats, cows, even wild boars near the farms outside town. Nothing moved like that. Nothing that tall or that silent. I lay there for hours, listening to the sounds outside, cars passing, people talking on the street, kids playing cricket in the lane below. The world went on as normal, but I felt different. I felt like something had changed. Like I had crossed into a place I wasn't supposed to be in. Like something had seen me there, and now it knew me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark shape moving behind the trees. I kept thinking about those footprints in the dirt, big and bare, facing towards me. I thought about the sound of it walking behind me, getting closer each time I stopped. I kept imagining it standing outside my window, watching me as I lay on the floor in the dark. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the ceiling fan spinning above me. My body felt tired, but my mind wouldn't stop. As the sun started to rise, I realized I never wanted to go back to that trail again. I never wanted to see those trees or hear the sound of water running between them, because deep down, I knew I wasn't alone there. I knew something was there before I arrived, and it was still there after I left, moving between the shadows, silent and hidden, waiting for the next person to wander too far into its home. I woke up at around 5 in the morning because of the cold. I hadn't planned to sleep outside, but I had been driving all night and got too tired to continue. I pulled over at a small clearing just off a quiet road that cut through thick pine woods. I turned off the engine, reclined the seat, and wrapped my hoodie tight around me to stay warm. It was quiet outside, too quiet. Even with the windows rolled up, I could hear the silence pressing in from every direction. There were no birds yet, no wind through the trees. Just darkness outside and the soft ticking of my cooling engine. When I finally woke up properly, the sun was just starting to come up. I could see pale orange light touching the tops of the trees, making them glow. I sat up straight in the car, rubbing my neck. I felt stiff and cold. My breath fogged the window in front of me. I wiped a circle clear with my palm and looked outside. The woods looked so peaceful and empty. I checked my phone for signal, but there was none. My battery was almost dead, too. I sat there thinking about what to do. My plan was to drive another 2 hours to reach a friend's place by noon. I opened the door to get some fresh air and stretched my legs outside. The air was so cold it burned my nostrils when I breathed in. I looked around. The car was parked on a patch of dirt that opened up like a small lot between thick, dark trees. I could hear a small creak somewhere nearby. My stomach growled. I decided to walk a little into the woods to find a spot to pee before starting my drive again. I zipped up my hoodie and stepped off the dirt patch into the trees. The ground was covered with fallen pine needles. They were soft under my shoes and made almost no sound when I walked. I moved deeper, looking for a tree wide enough to hide behind. The further I went, the colder it felt. The trees blocked out the growing sunlight, making it look like early dawn instead of morning. I found a good spot and relieved myself, shivering from the cold. When I was done, I turned to head back. That's when I noticed something that made me pause. There were footprints on the ground. They weren't mine. They looked fresh, pressed deep into the soft pine needles. They were boot prints, much larger than my own shoes. I bent down to see them clearly. The prints were leading away from where I was standing and going deeper into the woods. For some reason, seeing those prints made me feel nervous. I looked around quickly, trying to see if anyone was there. The woods were empty, silent, and still. I stood there, listening hard for any movement. There was nothing. I told myself it was probably just a hiker, or maybe someone camping nearby. But it still felt strange because there was no car parked near mine when I woke up. I started walking back towards my car, trying not to think about it. As I walked, I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was behind me. Each time, there was no one. When I reached my car, I felt relieved. I got in quickly and locked the doors. I started the engine and waited for the heater to warm up. I sat there, staring out at the trees, feeling uneasy. I decided I would leave immediately. But just before I put the car in gear, I saw movement to my right. My heart jumped. I turned my head quickly and looked. There was nothing there, just trees and shadows. I told myself I was tired and overthinking it. I drove out of the clearing and back onto the quiet road. The forest ran along both sides. The road twisted and turned for miles with no signs or houses. After about 10 minutes of driving, I saw a small dirt track leading off the main road into the woods. At the entrance, there was an old wooden sign. The paint was faded, but I could make out the words "Public Walking Trail." I thought about stopping there to stretch my legs properly before the long drive. I was still feeling stiff and cold. I pulled over, turned off the car, and stepped out. The entrance to the trail was narrow, with tall grass growing along the sides. I walked slowly, looking down at the damp ground, careful not to slip. The trail was muddy in places. There were puddles of water reflecting the gray morning sky. I could hear birds now, chirping far away. It felt a little better with the sound of life around me. I walked along the trail for about 15 minutes. The trees grew thicker and darker the further I went. The air smelled damp and heavy with moss. I felt uneasy again. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. I kept turning around, but no one was there. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just the fear of being alone in an unfamiliar place. Suddenly, I heard a branch snap to my left. My chest tightened. I stopped and listened. It was silent again. I stared into the trees but saw nothing. I forced myself to keep walking, but my pace was faster now. My hands felt cold and sweaty. Every step I took sounded too loud in the quiet woods. Then I heard it again, a branch snapping, closer this time. I froze. My ears were ringing from the fear rushing through me. I turned my head slowly to look. Deep among the trees, I saw movement. Someone was standing there, half hidden behind a tree trunk. I could see a dark jacket, blue jeans, and a pale face peeking out. They weren't moving, just standing there watching me. My whole body felt numb. I didn't move for a few seconds. I just stared back, unable to breathe properly. Then I turned and started walking quickly back towards the entrance of the trail. My legs felt heavy and weak. I kept looking over my shoulder. The person was gone. The space between the trees was empty again. I started running. I didn't care if I slipped in the mud. I just ran. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached the entrance and burst out onto the road. I ran straight to my car, fumbling for the keys with shaking hands. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine, all while looking around in panic. There was no one there. The road was empty in both directions. I drove away as fast as I could. I felt like vomiting from fear. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. After about 20 minutes, I saw a small gas station by the side of the road. I pulled in and parked. I sat there for a long time, trying to calm down. My breathing was ragged and shallow. I kept replaying what I saw in my mind. That person standing there, hidden in the trees, just watching me. After I felt calmer, I went inside to buy water. The man at the counter asked if I was okay. I said yes, just tired. I didn't want to explain anything. I paid and left. When I got back to my car, I sat there drinking the water and staring at the steering wheel. My hands were still shaking a little. I told myself it was probably just another hiker messing around. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't that simple. The way that person stood there, silent, hidden, watching without moving at all, it felt wrong. It felt dangerous. I drove the rest of the way to my friend's house without stopping. Even when I had to use the bathroom badly, I didn't stop. I just kept driving, looking at the rearview mirror every few seconds, making sure no one was following me. When I finally reached my friend's place, I parked in their driveway and just sat in the car for a while. The sun was high in the sky now, and everything looked normal. Kids were playing on bikes nearby. A woman was watering her plants, and a man was mowing his lawn. It felt like a different world from where I had just been. I went inside, and my friend hugged me. He asked why I looked so pale. I just said I was tired from the long drive. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that person standing in the woods, watching me. I kept thinking about those footprints I saw earlier that morning near where I peed. Maybe it was the same person. Maybe they were following me from the start, hiding in the trees, waiting for the right moment to come closer. Days passed, but the memory didn't fade. I kept thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't looked up in time, if I had kept walking further into the trail, if I hadn't noticed them standing there, watching. The thought of it made me feel sick inside. From that day onwards, I stopped taking random trails or stopping in empty places during long drives. I always made sure I reached my destination before dark, and I never slept in my car again. Even now, when I think about that morning, I feel my heart beat faster. It wasn't a ghost or a monster. It was just a person. But somehow, that makes it so much worse. Because people like that are real. They are out there, hiding, watching, waiting for someone alone in the woods who won't come back. And I know if I ever see something like that again, I won't ignore the feeling in my gut. I will turn around and leave before they get any closer. Because next time, I might not be so lucky to see them before it's too late. I woke up before the sun that morning, even though I hadn't planned on it. I could hear the birds outside starting their slow songs and the soft rustling of leaves against my tent wall. The air was cold on my nose, and I didn't want to unzip my sleeping bag, but I needed to go to the toilet badly. My knees ached from sleeping on the thin camping mat, and my neck felt stiff, but I slowly pushed myself up, careful not to wake my friend sleeping beside me. He was snoring lightly. The sky outside the mesh window was still dark blue, with just a thin line of pink on the horizon. I sat there for a minute, rubbing my eyes and listening to the forest waking up. There were little tapping sounds from branches shifting and the quiet drip of dew falling onto the tent. I finally unzipped my sleeping bag and crawled over my friend's feet to the tent door. My knees pressed into the cold ground, and I felt dirt stick to my skin. I unzipped the tent, the sound loud in the quiet dawn, and stepped outside. The air felt sharp in my lungs, and my bare arms prickled with goosebumps. I walked around to a tree a few meters away to relieve myself. The ground was rough and covered with pine needles and small rocks, pressing into my feet through my thin socks. I kept looking around, feeling vulnerable with my pants down in the silent woods, but nothing moved except the morning breeze pushing through the tops of the tall trees. When I finished, I stood there for a bit, stretching and rolling my neck, staring at the sky turning lighter behind the black silhouette of trees. I could hear a woodpecker tapping somewhere in the distance. The forest was silent except for the wind and the small sounds of birds waking up. I felt an emptiness in my stomach, like a hollow ache that wasn't just hunger. It felt like something deeper, like a quiet fear I hadn't noticed until then. I rubbed my arms to warm myself up and walked back to the tent to grab my shoes. I put them on outside, dusting off the pine needles stuck to the soles of my socks. My friend was still asleep, buried deep in his bag. I thought about going back in to sleep a little more, but something in me didn't want to. I felt restless, like I needed to walk. I grabbed my water bottle and drank a few gulps. The water was so cold it hurt my teeth. I stood there looking around the empty campsite. There was our tent, the dead fire pit, the folded camp chairs leaning against a tree. Beyond it, the woods stretched out dark and endless. I decided to walk down to the small stream we had passed yesterday while hiking in. It wasn't far, maybe 10 minutes down the trail. I thought it might wake me up properly. I started walking along the dirt path, stepping over roots and ducking under low branches. The woods were quiet except for birds calling and the gentle rush of wind in the treetops. My shoes crunched over fallen leaves and small sticks, the only harsh sound in the calm forest. I kept my eyes down to watch for rocks or roots that could trip me, but every few steps I looked up to check my surroundings. The light was still dim, with long shadows stretching between the trees. I walked for a while, thinking about nothing in particular, feeling the cool air on my face and breathing in the clean, damp smell of dirt, leaves, and pine. Eventually, I reached the stream. It was narrow but fast-moving, cutting through the rocks with clear, cold water. I crouched down and splashed some onto my face, feeling it sting my skin with its coldness. The stream gurgled and bubbled over stones, and I saw a few small fish darting between shadows. I sat down on a flat rock by the bank and listened to the water. The sun hadn't risen fully yet, so the woods still felt empty and half asleep. A chill ran through me despite my hoodie. As I sat there, I started to feel uneasy. I couldn't put my finger on why. Nothing had changed. The birds still sang, the water still rushed, the wind still moved the branches gently. But I felt exposed sitting there alone. I felt like I was being watched, even though every time I looked around there was nothing but trees and shadows. I stood up and decided to head back to camp. My skin felt tight with a cold sweat that wasn't from the morning air. I started walking faster than before, watching the trees carefully. Every movement of a branch or flicker of a bird made my heart jump. Halfway back, I heard a sound behind me, like a soft crunch of leaves underfoot. I stopped walking and listened. Nothing, just the wind pushing through the canopy far above. I started walking again, but after a few steps, I heard it again, another quiet crunch behind me, like someone stepping lightly, carefully. I turned around sharply, my eyes scanning the trees and undergrowth. Nothing moved. I told myself it was probably a falling stick or a squirrel jumping around, but my body didn't believe it. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. I kept walking, trying to keep my steps quiet so I could hear better. But the forest floor was littered with dry leaves and twigs. Every step felt loud. I heard the sound again behind me, closer this time, another crunch of leaves, then silence. I stopped again, turned, and stared into the woods. My eyes scanned between the trunks, over bushes, down to the dark dirt, up to the branches. There was nothing, but I felt it. I felt something there, something watching me, following me. My skin prickled all over, and I felt dizzy with fear. I started walking again, faster now, almost jogging. I kept looking back every few steps. I could feel my pulse hammering in my neck and ears. The morning felt colder now, the shadows darker, the trees taller and looming over me. I could hear my breath coming out fast and shaky. My stomach felt sick and empty at the same time. Every crunch of leaves behind me made me flinch and turn, but every time there was nothing. Eventually, I saw the edge of the campsite ahead, the small clearing where our tent stood. Relief washed over me like warm water, and I almost laughed out loud. I stepped out into the clearing, feeling the sun on my face for the first time that morning as it finally rose over the treetops. I turned around and looked back into the forest. The path I had just walked down looked empty, silent, and peaceful. I stood there breathing hard, my chest heaving. My hands were trembling. The tent was only a few meters away. I forced myself to turn and walk towards it. I sat down on the camping chair outside the tent, trying to calm my breathing. The morning air felt warmer now with the sun up, and I could hear more birds singing. I took another sip of water, my mouth dry. I sat there staring at the woods for a long time, my eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. Nothing happened. I told myself again and again that it was just my imagination. Maybe I was tired, maybe it was a squirrel or a deer stepping on leaves. But deep down, a small voice kept telling me I wasn't wrong, that something had been there. About an hour later, my friend woke up and climbed out of the tent, yawning and stretching. I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't want to sound crazy. We made breakfast, eggs and toast on the small camping stove, and packed up our things for a hike we planned later. The rest of the day passed quietly. We hiked, took photos, sat by the lake eating sandwiches, and watched the sun set behind the hills. But every time I stepped into the forest, every time the wind blew and leaves rustled, I felt that same tight fear in my chest. That night, as we sat by the fire, cooking sausages and boiling water for tea, I kept staring into the trees. The fire crackled and spat little sparks into the dark sky. My friend talked about the hike tomorrow, the route we'd take, how long it would be. I nodded and answered, but my eyes never left the woods. In the dancing firelight, the trees looked like tall black walls all around us. I felt trapped by them. Every little sound in the darkness made my muscles tense, waiting for something to step out. When we finally put out the fire and climbed into our sleeping bags, I lay there in the silent tent, listening. I could hear the forest alive outside. Insects chirping, wind moving leaves, small branches creaking and settling. I closed my eyes, but every time a leaf crunched or something moved in the undergrowth, my eyes snapped open and I stared at the dark ceiling of the tent, my ears straining. I lay like that for hours, my body stiff and aching, my mind spinning with fear and tiredness. Eventually, I fell asleep. I woke up before sunrise again. This time I didn't leave the tent. I lay there listening to the woods wake up, my bladder aching but my fear keeping me inside. I waited until the sun was up fully, and my friend woke up before I crawled out, feeling embarrassed by my own fear. We packed up camp that morning, folding the tent, brushing off dirt from the tarp, stuffing sleeping bags into their sacks. I kept looking around the clearing, feeling relief grow in my chest with every minute closer to leaving. When we finally hiked back to the car, I walked fast, my eyes always scanning the trees beside the trail. Every step away from that campsite felt lighter. When we reached the car, I threw my pack into the back seat and got in, slamming the door shut with shaking hands. As we drove away down the dirt road, I watched the forest disappear behind us in the rearview mirror. I still don't know what was there that morning. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was an animal just curious about me. But that feeling of being followed, that cold ache of fear in my chest, has never left me. Even now, whenever I think of that quiet dawn walk by the stream, I feel it again, that tightness in my stomach, that prickling on my skin, and the deep certainty that something was there with me, silent and unseen, watching from the shadows. I remember that night so clearly, even though it feels like a distant memory now, hidden behind years of normal life that came after. I was 16 back then, still trying to get through school without falling apart from the stress and the constant feeling of being watched in my own home. It was a normal summer night, warm and heavy, the type of night where your sheets stick to your skin. I had stayed up late scrolling through my phone, texting friends, thinking about pointless teenage things like my hair or my grades, or if I would ever be confident enough to talk to the boy I liked. I washed my clothes that evening and, like always, hung them on the door frame to dry. I didn't have an indoor drying rack, and the old door frame was wide enough to drape shirts, pants, and towels across it without them falling. I fell asleep around midnight with the little table fan pushing damp, warm air towards my bed. My grandmother was sleeping in the same room that weekend because my parents were out of town. She had her own little mattress laid out near the window while I slept on my bed closer to the door. I remember falling asleep to the sound of her soft snoring mixed with the hum of the fan. There was something comforting about knowing she was there. I always felt safer when I wasn't alone. But that night I woke up feeling cold. Not the type of cold you get from the fan, but an empty, hollow cold that seems to come from inside your chest. My eyes were heavy with sleep, crusted over at the edges. I didn't want to open them at first. I just wanted to turn to my side and slip back into whatever weird half-dream I was having. But something felt wrong. Like there was a presence in the room, something heavy and thick sitting on the air itself. My nose felt clogged from sleep, and I could hear my own breathing echo in my ears as I lay there, forcing myself to open my eyes. At first, everything was blurry. The shadows in my room danced like they always did when the streetlight outside flickered through my curtains. I blinked a few times, trying to focus, annoyed at being awake when I didn't need to be. That's when I noticed the clothes hanging on the door frame, swaying slightly. At first I thought it was the fan, but the fan wasn't pointed that way. Then I thought maybe Grandma had gotten up to use the bathroom and brushed past them, but I could hear her snoring softly behind me. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out what was moving. My eyes adjusted slowly, and I saw something gray behind my clothes, something tall that almost reached the top of the door frame. My mind refused to process what I was seeing for a moment. It was like looking at an optical illusion. Then the clothes moved more, swaying to the sides, and I saw legs. They were so thin and gray, with dark blue veins crawling under the skin like thick worms. My throat tightened with fear as my sleepy brain fought to wake up faster. I kept staring, unable to move, my heart hammering so hard that I could hear blood rushing in my ears. Then I saw these long pointed sticks pushing through my clothes. At first, I didn't understand what they were. They looked like sharpened tree branches, so thin and long they seemed unnatural. My brain was screaming at me to run, to scream, to wake my grandmother, but I was frozen, completely frozen. Then my eyes adjusted fully, and I saw him. I saw every detail, and that image has never left my mind since. He was extremely skinny, with bones poking through his gray veinous skin like he had never eaten in his life. His stomach stuck out in a bloated bulge, making his chest look even narrower. His fingers, those sticks I saw, were impossibly long, at least twice as long as normal fingers, each ending in a sharp pointed nail that looked like black glass. His arms were stick-thin, and his elbows bent outwards like broken branches. His chin was long and narrow, coming down to a pointed end that almost touched his chest. His eyes were huge, completely round, with no lids covering them. Just these giant glassy orbs that reflected every bit of light in the room, like animal eyes in the dark. His mouth was tiny, puckered like he was sucking on something invisible, and it moved up and down in a slow chewing motion, like he was eating an imaginary lollipop. He had a hunchback so sharp it pushed against the thin hospital gown he was wearing, the fabric torn at the spine where his bones jutted out. The gown was filthy, yellow-stained in places, hanging off his shriveled body like it had been soaked and dried too many times. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring straight at me with those lidless eyes. I stared back, feeling my breath catch in my throat. My chest felt tight, my hands tingled with pins and needles as I tried to scream. But my voice didn't work. I could only make these weak, choking sounds, like a wounded animal. I turned slightly, trying to reach for my grandmother, shaking her shoulder, but she didn't wake up. My eyes flicked back to the door, and he was still there, still chewing at nothing, his fingers twisting through my clothes like he was searching for something hidden between the fabric. My heart was beating so fast I thought I would pass out. The longer I stared at him, the more I noticed about his body. His head was huge, cone-like, rising to a rounded point at the top. He had no hair at all. His skin was stretched so tight over his skull that I could see every dip and ridge, every line and vein. His neck was long and thin, bending slightly to the side as he tilted his giant head to look at me. He didn't blink. He couldn't blink. I wondered if he even had eyelids to close. He stood still, almost like he was frozen, except for his moving fingers and the slow chewing of his tiny mouth. He looked surprised, almost confused, like he didn't expect me to be able to see him. That thought terrified me even more. Why wouldn't he expect to be seen? What was he doing there, rummaging through my clothes at 3 in the morning? I shook my grandmother harder, finally managing to push out a squeaky gasp that sounded more like a sob. She shifted in her sleep, turning to face me. Her eyes opened halfway, bleary and confused. She followed my gaze towards the door. And just like that, he was gone. There was no sound, no blur of movement, no fading into the shadows. He was simply not there anymore. The clothes stopped swaying and hung perfectly still against the door frame. My grandmother mumbled something under her breath and turned over to go back to sleep, not understanding what she had almost seen. I lay there for the rest of the night, wide awake, staring at the door, trying to make sense of what happened. My chest felt heavy, like something was sitting on it. Every time I blinked, I saw his face again, those giant, unblinking eyes burning into my memory forever. In the weeks before that night, strange things had been happening in the house. Small things at first, like my bedroom door slamming shut on its own. At first I thought it was the wind or the slight slope in the floorboards, but sometimes it happened when all the windows were closed and there was no breeze. Then the door started locking itself. I'd go to the bathroom and come back to find it locked from the inside, even though there was no one in there. My dad had to take the knob apart once to let me back in. I also started having horrible nightmares around that time. Dreams where I was drowning in tar, sinking deeper and deeper into a sticky darkness while something watched from above. Or dreams where I was paralyzed in my bed, feeling something cold and rough breathing on my neck, but unable to turn and see it. One night, a few days before I saw the gray man, I woke up to the feeling of several cold hands touching my feet and legs under the blanket. The hands moved slowly, gently, almost like they were checking to see if I was awake. I kicked and thrashed, but the feeling didn't go away until I turned on the lamp beside my bed. After that, I started sleeping with the light on. It made no difference to what I saw that night. After I saw him, I didn't tell anyone right away. I was too scared they would think I was going crazy. I barely slept for the next 2 nights, staying awake with my lamp on, staring at the door frame, half expecting his gray veined body to appear again. I kept thinking about his fingers. They were so long and thin, with no muscle, just gray skin pulled tight over bone. I thought about what would have happened if he reached towards my bed. If those stick-like fingers had brushed against my face or neck while I lay there frozen with fear. The thought made me sick to my stomach. On the 3rd day, I finally told my parents. They didn't know what to do. My mom called a priest to come bless the house. He came with his little bottle of holy water, spraying it in every corner while muttering prayers under his breath. He went room by room, sprinkling water on my clothes hanging in the doorway, on my bed, on the windows. I didn't feel anything change while he was doing it. There was no sudden rush of warmth or sense of safety returning. I just stood there awkwardly while he prayed, staring at the floor, feeling like I was going crazy. But after that, the strange things stopped happening. My door never slammed shut on its own again. I didn't feel hands touching my legs at night. The nightmares stopped. I don't know if it was the blessing that worked, or if telling my parents about everything gave my brain enough peace to let go of the fear it had been holding. Sometimes I think I really saw something that wasn't supposed to be seen, something that moved through the house at night when everyone was asleep, confident that no human eyes could ever look directly at it. Other times I think I manifested it myself, that maybe my stressed-out teenage brain created something so real it felt like it was standing in front of me, rustling through my clothes in the dark. But I do know one thing for certain. I never sleep with the door open anymore. Even now, years later, as an adult, living in my own apartment with my own locked bedroom door, I keep it shut tight every night. Sometimes I wake up thinking about those fingers, or his giant lidless eyes staring at me from behind my clothes, wondering if he's still there, waiting behind some dark corner, surprised that I can see him. And every time that memory comes back to me, I pull my blanket up to my chin and remind myself that it doesn't matter if it was real or not. Because what I saw When I think back to all the years I spent in nursing school, I remember the tired mornings, the long nights of studying, the endless practicals and clinical rotations. We were just students back then, learning everything by watching and doing under supervision. Some days felt like they would never end, and some memories faded over time like words on an old page. But there are a few days that stayed with me forever, burned into my mind so deeply that even now, after 20 years as a nurse, I can remember every single detail like it just happened. This story is about one of those days. It was during my final rotation. I was already exhausted before the shift even started. The morning was cold, and I remember the sky was a flat, dull gray, like a faded bedsheet hung across the world. I reached the hospital half awake, walking through the glass doors with my coffee in hand, feeling its warmth spread through my fingers. The halls smelled like they always did, a mix of disinfectant, old carpet, and that faint smell of sickness that clings to every hospital no matter how clean it is. That day I was assigned to a lady in her late 70s. Her name was written on the board above her bed. I won't mention it, but I remember it well. Her hair was white and thin, spread around her pillow like delicate threads. Her cheeks had sunken a little, but there was still a softness in her face, a kindness that made her look gentle even as she lay there, staring at the ceiling. She was awake when I went to check on her early in the morning. Her eyes followed me around the room. I felt like she wanted to say something, but her words never came out right. She seemed tired, like her body had run out of its last bits of energy, and only her mind was left drifting in the quiet room. During handover, I learned she had been admitted for heart failure. She had been clear about one thing for a long time. She didn't want to be resuscitated if anything happened. She was marked DNR on her chart. I remember feeling some kind of respect for that decision. I thought about how hard it must be to know that your life is at its end, and to make peace with it so deeply that you tell everyone not to bring you back if your time comes. As students, we read her file and listened to the nurse explain her history. She had lived a full life, had children, and now those children were the ones making decisions for her. Later that day, everything changed. She became altered, her awareness drifting in and out. She was restless. Sometimes her eyes would open, staring blankly at the ceiling tiles, and other times she slept so deeply it looked like she wasn't breathing at all. While we were busy checking her vitals and giving her meds, her daughter came in, followed by her son. They spoke to the nurse in charge. They had gotten power of attorney over her care. Their voices were calm, and there was a confidence in their eyes that I didn't quite understand. They decided to change her code status from DNR to full code. I remember feeling uncomfortable hearing this. Everyone on the floor knew that this was against their mother's wishes. But in the hospital, power of attorney is power. It's legal. It's final. We had to follow the children's decision. The shift continued as usual. I did vitals, charted check drips, and went from room to room with my preceptor. The day passed slowly. Hours felt heavy, ticking by like seconds trapped in thick honey. It was after lunch, maybe close to 2 in the afternoon, when everything suddenly changed. I had just finished checking a patient 2 rooms down when I heard the alarms go off. Those alarms were sharp, cold, and urgent. The kind of sound that made your blood run faster and your chest tighten. I rushed down the hall, following the code blue. Nurses were already gathered around her bed. She was lying there, still and pale. Her face had lost every bit of color. The monitor showed VFib. Her heart was quivering but not pumping. She had no pulse, no breathing, just an empty body shaking silently inside. The code team arrived, pushing the crash cart through the door. The room filled with people. The doctor came in quickly, gloves snapped on, eyes scanning the monitor. I remember standing against the wall, trying to stay out of the way, while also preparing to jump in if told. One nurse started chest compressions immediately. The sound of her hands pressing down on that small chest was something I can still hear if I think hard enough. It was steady and hard, the bed creaking under each push. Someone bagged her. The doctor got the defibrillator pads ready. Everything was happening in organized chaos, movements practiced and confident. The doctor called for a shock. He pressed the button on the defibrillator. The screen blinked, and then an error flashed. He tried again, adjusting the pads, checking the wires, making sure everything was connected properly. The machine refused to deliver the shock. Everyone's eyes darted to the screen, then to the doctor, then to the patient, and back to the machine. Time felt like it had stopped, but in reality, everything was moving fast. The nurse doing compressions kept going, sweat starting to bead on her forehead. Another nurse checked the leads again, pressing them firmly onto the lady's chest. The doctor tried a third time. The machine gave the same silent refusal, blinking its error message on the bright green screen. The room was filled with the sound of alarms, the beeping of the monitor, the deep mechanical breaths of the amber bag, and the rhythmic thump of compressions. For a moment, the doctor just stared at the machine. I could see the frustration and confusion in his face. These machines were checked every morning, sometimes twice a day. They always worked. Always. I had been in a few codes already, and I had never seen one fail to deliver a shock. It was unheard of. The doctor tried again, pushing the button harder, as if force would fix the problem. The machine did nothing. The lady lay there, chest rising and falling under the compressions, eyes half open but empty. Then her body began to fade. Her skin changed from pale to an ashy gray. Her lips lost their color completely. I watched her chest under the nurse's hands, saw how her ribs moved with each push, but she wasn't there anymore. I felt a coldness spread through me, like the walls of the room were shrinking in. It felt wrong to be forcing life back into a body that seemed so ready to leave. Finally, after a few more cycles, the doctor called it. The nurse stopped compressions. The room fell silent except for the alarms still beeping. Someone reached over and turned them off. I could hear my own breathing, the heavy sound of it echoing in my mask. The doctor looked down at her. I don't know what he was thinking, but there was a stillness in his face that told me he was shaken. Then something happened that I still think about even today. After they removed the defibrillator pads, packed up the crash cart, and covered her body with the thin white hospital blanket, the defibrillator was tested again before they left the room. The nurse pressed the button to check it. The machine worked perfectly. No error. No issues. Just the soft, steady beep indicating it was ready to shock again. Everyone just stared at it. The nurse testing it looked up at the doctor, and he just shook his head slightly, not saying anything. They rolled the cart out of the room, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt like it was pressing down on my ears. I stood there against the wall for a while, my legs feeling numb. I couldn't look at her. I kept staring at the floor, my eyes fixed on the tile pattern, trying to control my breathing. Later, I learned that the machine was checked again by the biomedical team. There was no malfunction. Nothing wrong with the wires, the leads, the battery, or the software. It was working perfectly. It had been working perfectly the day before, that morning, and every test afterwards. There was no explanation. No reason why it failed in that exact moment, when it was needed most. I walked out of her room feeling like my feet were too heavy to lift. The hallway seemed brighter somehow, but also empty. I went into the break room and washed my hands slowly, staring at the water swirling down the drain. I thought about her wishes, about how she didn't want to be brought back, about how her children made a choice that wasn't truly hers. I wasn't angry at them. I just felt sad, deeply sad in a way that made my chest hurt. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was at work in that room. I didn't think it was supernatural or ghostly. I still don't. But there was something in that moment that felt final. It felt like a choice being honored, not by us, not by the hospital, not by her children, but by life itself. Like her body refused to come back, no matter what machines or people wanted. She wanted peace. And in the end, despite everything done to keep her here, she got what she wanted. I've seen so many deaths over the years, some peaceful, some violent, some so lonely it hurts to remember. But that lady's death stayed with me more than most. Even now, decades later, I can still see the blinking error message on that machine, the silent refusal to shock her back into a life she didn't want anymore. When I left the hospital that evening, the sky was still gray, but there was a slight hint of orange far away, like the sun was trying to set behind the clouds. The wind was cool against my face. I remember thinking about how fragile life is, how all the machines and drugs and efforts sometimes mean nothing when a person's spirit is ready to go. I sat in my car for a while before starting the engine, watching people walk in and out of the hospital doors, each carrying their own worries, their own stories, never knowing how life might end for them. I drove home slowly that evening, feeling quiet inside. I kept thinking about her face, about how calm she looked even as her body was failing. I thought about her children too, wondering if they ever felt guilty for changing her wishes, or if they truly believed they were doing the right thing. I'll never know. All I know is that the machine worked again after she left. It was as if her body itself rejected our attempts, refusing to be shocked back to pain. And somehow, in that small moment, I felt When I was about 13 years old, our dog ran away again. It wasn't new to me. The gate in our backyard never really latched properly unless you pushed it hard, and my older brother always left it swinging. Our dog was small, white, with a bit of brown around her ears, and she loved sniffing at anything, even if it was just a wet spot on concrete or a torn wrapper drifting along the road. That day was like any other day when she got out. I didn't even tell my parents when I noticed, because I was so used to it. I just slipped on my shoes, grabbed her leash, and went out into the back alley. I remember the way the sun felt hot on my neck that day. It was one of those afternoons where the sky was painfully bright, but the wind was cool. The alley behind our house smelled like dust and old vegetables rotting in black garbage bins. There was always someone's trash left out, half-picked by stray cats. My dog usually never went far, maybe a block down at most, always poking her nose behind fences, looking for half-eaten chicken bones or interesting plastic bags. I walked slowly, whistling her name softly every now and then. I didn't like calling out too loudly, embarrassed someone would think I was making noise for no reason. I checked behind the garages first. They were lined up along the back of our street, each with peeling paint and old padlocks. Some people had guard dogs inside their yards, but today even those dogs seemed asleep. I walked along the gravel, the rocks crunching under my shoes, kicking away bits of glass. My heart started to feel heavy in my chest after about 15 minutes. She wasn't there. I called her name again, louder this time, feeling the echo bounce back at me from the brick walls of houses. I crossed the road into the next alley. It smelled even worse there. Someone had thrown out an old carpet, and it was soaked with something dark and sticky. Flies buzzed everywhere, swarming it. I walked past it, holding my breath, and looked behind more fences, calling her name over and over again. I tried not to think about her getting hit by a car. I tried not to think about the dead cat I'd once seen flattened by the speed bump on our street. Its fur all stuck to the ground. I walked block after block, checking the same kinds of alleys, the same kinds of fences, the same dirty corners filled with weeds and empty soda bottles. After half an hour, my feet felt numb. I hadn't worn socks, and the cheap shoes were biting into my heels. I remember looking down at my feet and seeing a bit of blood where my skin had rubbed raw. I felt like crying then. She'd never gone this far before. She never even left the alleys, always staying in the shadows behind houses, sniffing at overturned bins or barking at cats from a distance. I felt my chest tightening as I walked. My eyes started to sting. I wanted to give up, go home, and just wait for her to come back like she always did. But something in me felt wrong that day. Something felt too quiet. I don't know why. I just kept walking. I crossed another street, this time a busier one with cracked old asphalt and potholes filled with brown water. Cars drove past fast, their wind pushing against me as I crossed. I remember thinking about how my mom would be mad if she knew I crossed there without using the light. On the other side was an area I'd never really been to. It had townhouses, all lined up the same, with small square yards fenced off with tall wooden fences painted dark brown. The paint was peeling in places, the wood underneath turning gray and soft. It was quiet there. No kids were playing, no bikes laying around, no toys left out. Just silent square houses with curtains drawn shut. It felt lonely, like everyone had left at once. I almost turned back. My feet hurt so bad, my mouth felt dry, and I felt so tired all of a sudden, like someone had poured sand into my bones. I wanted to go home and lay down on the couch with a glass of water, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above. But then I saw it, a small movement behind one of those fences. Just a flicker of white through the gap between two boards. I froze. I held my breath and stared, waiting. Then I heard it. A sharp yip, like she always made when she was frustrated or scared. My heart jumped so hard it hurt my ribs. I ran up to the fence and pressed my face against the gap. There she was, my dog. She was muddy, her white fur all brown and dripping with something dark like wet soil. Her ears were back flat against her head, and she was tugging frantically at a metal chain attached to her collar. The chain was wrapped around a wooden post sticking out of the ground near the fence. She kept pulling and yipping, trying to get to me, her eyes wide and desperate. I felt relief so strong I almost fell over. I thought maybe these people found her and tied her up so she wouldn't run away. I thought maybe they'd seen her wandering and wanted to keep her safe until someone came looking. I walked up to the front door, trying to calm my breathing, wiping the sweat off my forehead with my sleeve. I remember how the front steps felt rough under my feet. The doormat was worn down, just threads and rubber backing left. I pressed the doorbell once. I heard voices inside, muffled yelling or talking, then nothing. I waited, rubbing my foot against the edge of the step, then rang it again, pressing hard until the buzzing stopped. After a while, the door cracked open. A man stood there. He was old, maybe in his 60s, with thin hair combed sideways across his head and deep wrinkles around his eyes. His eyes looked dull and tired, and his face was oily, like he'd been sweating but hadn't washed. He wore a white undershirt with stains down the front. I felt my throat close up when I saw him. Something about him made my stomach twist. He stared at me without saying anything, just blinking slowly like he'd just woken up. I swallowed hard and tried to smile. My voice came out small and shaky. I told him about my dog, how I was so happy he found her, how I'd been looking for almost an hour. He just kept staring at me, blinking slowly, like he didn't understand the words. Then he said in a flat voice that they didn't have any dog there. No dog. Just like that. No emotion. No confusion. Nothing. Like he'd practiced saying it. I felt cold sweat run down my back. I said again that my dog was in his backyard, chained to his post. He frowned at me, deeper this time, like I'd insulted him. Then he said again, no dog here, and started to close the door. My heart started to pound so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I shoved my foot against the door frame before it closed. My shoe left a black mark on the paint. I almost screamed at him then. I told him again louder, pointing towards his yard, telling him my dog was right there. I heard her start to bark frantically, a sharp, high bark that cracked the quiet street. He glanced in the direction I was pointing, then looked back at me. His eyes narrowed, and he made this disgusted grimace with his mouth, like he was annoyed he had to deal with me. He said, "Oh, that dog," in this bored voice, like he'd just remembered she existed. He didn't say anything else. He just closed the door without a word. I stood there frozen, staring at the brown door with peeling paint, feeling my chest rise and fall in shallow breaths. My eyes felt hot with tears, but I didn't want to cry in front of his house. I walked back around the fence, ready to climb over it if I had to. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely grip the top plank. Then I saw him come out through the patio door. He stepped into the yard, walking slowly towards my dog. She backed away from him so fast she nearly fell over herself. Her tail was tucked so far under her belly, it almost touched her chest. Her ears were flat, and she crouched down low to the ground. He didn't even look at her. He just bent over, unhooked the chain, and walked over to the gate. He unlocked it and pushed it open with one hand, then turned and walked back inside without even glancing at me. The second the gate opened, she bolted out like a bullet. She ran straight into my legs, almost knocking me over. She was shaking so hard her collar rattled. I knelt down and scooped her up in my arms, feeling how her body trembled against mine, how her fur was soaked with dirty water and smelled like mold and fear. I buried my face into her wet neck and held her so tight I could feel her tiny ribs moving with every ragged breath. I didn't even look back at his house. I just turned and started walking home, feeling her little heart hammering against my chest. My shoes squelched with every step, the blood in my heels soaking into the fabric. My mouth felt dry and sour, and I swallowed over and over, trying not to cry. I walked all the way back the same way I came, block after block, my arms getting numb from carrying her, my shoulders burning with the weight. She didn't move the entire way. She just pressed herself into me, shaking, staring back over my shoulder the whole time. Every time I glanced back, she was staring at where we'd come from, her eyes wide and blank. When we got home, I set her down on the kitchen floor. She ran straight under the table and curled up so tight she looked like a pile of dirty laundry. My mom asked where I'd been, but I didn't answer. I just went to my room, shut the door, and sat on my bed staring at the wall for a long time, listening to the sound of her nails clicking on the linoleum as she moved under the table to hide. After that day, she never left the yard again, even when the gate was left wide open. Sometimes I'd find her sitting just inside it, staring out at the alley, but never stepping past the shadow line. Once I came home and found her sitting outside the gate, waiting patiently, her nose pressed against the wood, but she hadn't moved an inch past it. I still think about that man sometimes, about what would have happened if I hadn't walked those extra 6 blocks that day, about what he was planning to do with her or why he lied. I never told my parents what really happened. I didn't want to explain it. I didn't want to see them look at me with that same fear I felt. But I never forgot his face, the way he looked at me. I still remember that night so clearly, like it's burned into my bones. I was 13 years old, and my body had been feeling strange for days before it finally happened. My first period. I felt sick and heavy and embarrassed, like I wasn't ready to be part of the world in this way. That evening, I had stayed quiet through dinner with my family, feeling cramps twist my stomach. I washed my plate, said goodnight quickly, and went to my room. The pain made me tired, but it was also a different kind of tired, like my body wanted to collapse under its own weight. I just wanted to sleep it off and wake up normal again, without the sick feeling of becoming something new. I remember changing into my pajamas. I used the old big t-shirt I always wore to bed, the one with faded letters that didn't mean anything anymore, and loose black sweatpants. I turned off my lamp and crawled under my thin blanket, curling up on my side like I always did. My room felt small and safe in the darkness, with the window closed tight and my closet door slightly cracked open. I stared at the wall, feeling my heart beat in my stomach with every cramp. Eventually I shifted onto my back, thinking maybe it would hurt less. I never slept on my back. It felt unnatural and left my chest open, like I was waiting for something to pounce. At some point I drifted off. The dream I had was so strange. I was sitting on a wooden chair, like the ones in our dining room, but I was alone in a big empty white room. The floor stretched out forever in all directions. There were no walls, no ceiling, no windows, just white emptiness. I was sitting in the chair, my feet not touching the floor. I started to lean back, balancing the chair on two legs like I always got in trouble for doing at school. But it didn't stop at just balancing. The chair kept tipping back, slowly, further and further, and there was no floor behind me to catch it. It was like I was leaning into a bottomless pit. My stomach twisted and turned with fear as the chair tilted endlessly. It felt like I was about to fall into eternity itself, that black feeling of never hitting the ground. I felt myself scream in the dream, but no sound came out. Just an endless falling feeling as the chair drifted backwards with no end. I woke up in a full jolt, gasping, but the scream was still trapped inside me. My eyes opened wide and my chest was heaving, but my body didn't move at all. I was frozen in place, staring straight up at my ceiling in the dark. I felt dizzy and my vision blurred as my eyes adjusted to the room's faint light. And then I saw it, right above me. It wasn't the ceiling I was looking at. It was a face. It was leaning over me, so close that if I could move my arms, I could have touched it. Its skin was flat and white, almost like a smooth sheet of paper. The shape of its head was long and ovular, like an egg flattened sideways, and it wore a black hood over it, making it look like a floating mask in the dark. Its eyes were huge and ovular too, glassy and dark, but reflecting just enough light that I could see they were staring straight into mine. They weren't human eyes. They were empty eyes, like looking into two wet stones that could swallow me whole. Its eyebrows were high, arched in a permanent twisted expression that felt like anger and hunger at the same time. Its lips were thin and quivering, trembling with rage, and I could see two small holes where its nose should be. But it wasn't breathing. Nothing moved except those trembling lips, like it wanted to say something, but it didn't. It just stayed there, hovering inches above my face, staring right into me with that expression like it was determined to eat my soul, like it wasn't even thinking about my body. It wanted something deeper than flesh. I tried to scream. I tried to move, to push it away, to turn my head, to close my eyes, anything. But nothing happened. I couldn't even blink. I was stuck, frozen on my back, with this thing looming over me like it owned me. I felt its hate burn through my chest, like it wasn't even using heat, just pure force of its hate pressing down into my ribs, curling into my lungs, making it impossible to breathe. I felt like it was pinning my soul down with its stare, draining everything from me while I laid there helpless. My throat felt like it was full of sand, and my eyes started watering because I couldn't close them. The tears ran down the sides of my face into my hair and pillow, and all I could do was look up at it. It felt like hours passed in those few seconds. I felt a shaking inside my bones, like every part of me was vibrating with terror, but my body still couldn't twitch. Then somehow, a tiny sound escaped me. Just a little whimper, like a mouse squeak in the corner of a room. As soon as that sound came out, its head pulled back so fast it blurred, and I saw its full height for the first time. It stood straight up at the foot of my bed. It was tall, taller than anyone I had ever seen, so tall that its hood almost touched the ceiling. Its body was covered in a black cloak that didn't show any shape. It was thin, though. I could tell by the way the fabric hung straight down in empty folds. Its long arms were hidden, but I felt like they were hanging by its sides or pressed close to its chest under the cloak. I couldn't look away. It started pacing back and forth at the foot of my bed. Slow, careful steps, like it was thinking hard about what to do with me. Its eyes never left mine. I could feel them on me, hot and heavy like two burning coals pressing into my skin. I could see the frustration in its eyebrows, the way they stayed arched high with anger, like it was trying to reach me through some force field that kept it away. I felt its hate pour across the room in waves, like a starving tiger that could see its prey but couldn't break through the glass to get it. Every time it turned to pace back the other way, the cloak swayed, and I could see it had no feet, just blackness that blended into the shadows of my floor. I stayed frozen, my back glued to the mattress, my arms stiff by my sides, staring at it. The longer it paced, the angrier it seemed to get. Its quivering lips curled back like it was snarling, though no teeth showed. Its eyes were wide open, never blinking, unbreakable eye contact as it moved. My chest felt crushed with fear, my lungs burned from shallow breaths, and my body trembled with an invisible vibration I couldn't control. Then it stopped pacing. It turned its whole body to face my closet. The door was open just a few inches, showing only darkness inside. It leaned forward, folding down like it was collapsing into itself, and it slipped into the crack of the closet door without touching it. I watched as it disappeared inside, but its face didn't vanish with the rest of its body. It stayed visible in the darkness of the closet, staring back at me through the tiny opening. Its glassy eyes still locked on mine, its expression still twisted with hate and frustration. Its body was gone, but its head was there, peeking out, quivering with that same rage. I didn't know how long I laid there staring back at it. Minutes felt like hours, and I couldn't blink or look away. Eventually, slowly, its face started to fade into the shadows, like smoke drifting into darkness, until there was nothing there at all. The closet was just a closet again, silent and black with my old clothes hanging inside. But I didn't move. I couldn't move. My body was still locked with fear, and my eyes burned from the dryness. I kept staring at that crack in the door, waiting for the face to come back out. Finally, after what felt like my whole life passed, I forced my arm to twitch. Then my other arm. Then my legs. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears like thunder. The room felt different now, like the air was thicker and heavier. I turned on my lamp with a shaking hand, and the sudden light felt so harsh that it made my eyes ache. But I didn't care. I sat there on my bed, with the lamp on, staring at my closet for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep again. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its face leaning over me again, feeling its hate pressing down into my chest. I felt like I had lost something that night, like a part of my childhood was eaten away by that stare. When the sun finally rose, I got out of bed with my legs wobbling under me. I left my bedroom light on and went to the living room, turning on every lamp and ceiling light I could. I sat on the couch with my knees pulled to my chest, staring at the TV that wasn't even on. I sat there for hours, numb and silent, until my parents woke up. I didn't tell them anything. How could I? What words were there for something like that? For years I told myself it was sleep paralysis. That was the only thing that made sense. The doctor explained to us in biology class that sleep paralysis was when your body woke up before your brain released it from sleep chemicals. That people saw shadows or monsters because their brains were still dreaming while their eyes were open. I clung to that explanation like a rope in the dark, telling myself over and over again that it was normal, that it was just a bad dream mixed with being awake. That science could explain everything I saw, that the hate I felt wasn't real, that the way it looked at me wasn't real. I tried to believe it. It helped me sleep again, though I never slept on my back after that, and I never left my closet door open again, not even an inch. Then one day, years later, when I was in high school, I made a new friend. She was quiet, kept to herself, but one afternoon while we were eating lunch together, she told me something. She said she had trouble sleeping at night because of something she saw when she was younger. She said she woke up one night and saw a figure standing in her living room by the kitchen. It was staring at her, its big eyes locked on hers, and it raised a thin hand to beckon her forward. She said she thought she was hallucinating, but when she looked away and looked back, it was still there, not moving, not fading. She described it as wearing a black cloak, with a white flat face, big glassy eyes, and thin lips that looked angry. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and my heart dropped into my stomach. I told her I saw something like that too. I woke up early that morning with a heavy feeling in my chest. I didn't really know why, but something felt off. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the ceiling fan clicking every few seconds as it turned. It was still dark outside, but the birds had already started making their little sounds in the trees behind the house. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, feeling the crust of sleep on my eyelashes. I had planned to go on a run today because I hadn't exercised in weeks, and my body felt stiff and tired all the time. I hated that feeling, but I hated running even more. Still, I needed to force myself to go. I stood up, stretched my arms, felt my shoulders crack, then walked to the bathroom. My reflection looked pale under the dim yellow light. I splashed water on my face and felt a bit more awake. I brushed my teeth, the taste of mint covering the dry taste in my mouth from sleeping with it open. After changing into my running clothes, which were just a pair of loose black shorts and a gray t-shirt, I laced up my old running shoes. They had small tears near the toes from years of use, but I didn't care. They still worked. I grabbed my phone and headphones, stepping out into the cool morning air. The sun wasn't up yet, but there was that faint blue light across the sky that comes before dawn. The street was completely empty. The houses around mine were all dark, except for one far down the block with a kitchen light on. Probably someone getting ready for an early shift. I started walking, warming up my legs, stretching a bit as I walked towards the end of my street. The pavement felt rough under my thin shoes. I could hear my footsteps echo slightly in the silent neighborhood. After 5 minutes of walking, I started to jog slowly. My breath felt cold in my chest. I turned left onto the small main road that led out of my housing area. There was a row of small shops on one side, all closed with their metal shutters down. I passed by them, noticing an empty plastic bag stuck to a lamp post, moving slightly in the breeze. I kept my pace steady, feeling the muscles in my calves pull tight as they warmed up. My breathing got heavier, but I ignored it. I just wanted to finish this run and get back home to shower. I turned onto another street, this one lined with small trees planted at equal distances on both sides. Their leaves were dark and still, not moving much in the morning breeze. I focused on my steps, one after the other, hearing the rhythmic slap of my shoes on the pavement. After about 15 minutes, I reached the edge of the neighborhood. There was a narrow road that curved down into a small valley where there were no houses, just an old construction site that had been abandoned a few years ago. It was a large area with overgrown weeds and half-built gray structures with exposed rebar rusting in the air. The road passed right along its edge before curving back towards the city. I usually never went down that road because I didn't like the feeling of being alone near that place. It was always quiet there, and the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. But today I decided I'd run down it and make a full loop back home instead of turning around. I picked up my pace a little as I reached the decline. My breathing quickened, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. As I reached the flat part next to the abandoned site, I glanced to my right. The broken fence that surrounded the area was bent down in some places. Tall dry grass and weeds grew through cracks in the road leading inside. The unfinished buildings looked like giant skeletons in the dim morning light. Their empty window spaces were just black holes staring back at me. I tried to keep my eyes straight ahead, focusing on the curve ahead, but something made me glance back again. This time I saw a movement near one of the buildings. It was a small shape, dark against the lighter concrete. At first I thought it was a stray dog, but as it moved closer to the fence, I realized it was a person. They were crouched low, almost on all fours, but not quite. They moved quickly between the tall weeds and stopped near the broken part of the fence, just standing there half hidden behind the metal and plants. My heart started beating faster. I told myself it was probably just a homeless person looking for a place to sleep, but something about the way they moved made my skin crawl. It wasn't normal. It was too fast, too low to the ground, almost like they were gliding. I kept running, telling myself not to look back, but my mind kept imagining them climbing over the fence and following me down the road. My legs felt weak with fear, but I forced myself to keep my pace. The road curved to the left, away from the site, and I felt a small bit of relief as the buildings disappeared from view behind the trees that lined the road. My breathing was ragged now, both from running and from panic. The road was completely empty. No cars, no other runners, not even a bird sound. Just the pounding of my shoes and the wind in my ears. After a few minutes, the road sloped up again. I slowed down to a walk to catch my breath. My legs were shaking slightly. I glanced back down the road to see if anyone was there. It was empty, but my chest still felt tight. I decided to keep walking fast until I reached the housing area again. As I walked, I kept thinking about what I saw. The way the person moved bothered me deeply. I couldn't get the image out of my mind. Their limbs seemed too long, their body too low to the ground. My stomach twisted as I thought about it. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me because I was tired and the light was dim. But deep down, I didn't believe that. Finally, I reached the start of the neighborhood again. The sun was coming up now, lighting the street in pale gold. I felt a bit better seeing the houses, the parked cars, the open windows. I jogged the rest of the way back home, wanting to be inside as quickly as possible. When I reached my house, I unlocked the door with shaking hands and stepped inside. The cool air inside hit my sweaty skin, making me shiver. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing heavily. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and drank it all in one go. My hands were still shaking slightly. I sat down at the table, staring at the wooden surface, trying to calm my breathing. My heart was still pounding, and my mind kept replaying that movement I saw. I tried to think logically about it, telling myself it was just someone looking for scrap metal or a place to sleep. Maybe they were injured. and that's why they were crouched like that. But that explanation didn't sit right with me. After sitting for about 10 minutes, I got up and went to shower. The hot water felt good on my cold skin. I stood there for a long time, just letting the water run over my back and shoulders. My legs felt sore and heavy from the run, but the tension in my chest stayed. When I stepped out, I felt slightly calmer. I got dressed and made some breakfast, though I wasn't hungry. I sat by the window, eating slowly, staring out at the bright morning outside. People were walking their dogs, kids were playing on bikes, cars were leaving for work. Everything looked normal, peaceful. But my mind kept going back to that road, to that empty construction site, to that figure crouched low in the weeds. The fear hadn't left me. It had just settled deeper into my chest like a heavy stone. I thought about calling someone and telling them what I saw. But what would I even say? That I saw someone crouched behind a fence? No one would care. They'd just say to ignore it. Later that day, I decided to walk back down that road to prove to myself that it was nothing. I waited until the sun was fully up, around noon, and put on my shoes again. As I stepped outside, the heat hit me immediately. The streets were busy now, people walking around, cars driving past. I walked quickly, wanting to get it over with. My legs felt tired from the morning run, but I ignored the soreness. As I reached the narrow road leading to the construction site, I felt my heart start beating faster again. The area looked different in daylight. The weeds looked more brown than dark, and the buildings didn't look as threatening. They just looked like sad abandoned structures. I kept walking until I reached the broken part of the fence. I stood there, looking inside. The weeds were tall, almost up to my chest. The ground was littered with broken bricks and pieces of rusted metal. There was no one there now, just the wind moving through the dry grass, making a scratching sound. I stepped closer to the fence, peering inside. There was a faint path in the weeds leading deeper towards the buildings. My chest tightened as I imagined following that path and finding something I didn't want to see. I shook my head, telling myself to stop thinking like that. I turned around and started walking back home quickly, my skin feeling cold despite the hot sun. The rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept glancing out the windows, checking the locks on my doors. Every time I heard a small sound outside, my heart would jump in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. I kept waking up every hour, listening for sounds outside my window. I didn't hear anything, but the silence felt heavy and thick, almost louder than noise. For the next few days, I avoided running down that road. I stuck to the streets near my house, staying where I could see people and houses. But even then, every shadow made my heart beat faster. Every small movement in the corner of my eye made my body go stiff with fear. I felt like I was being watched all the time, like someone was waiting for me to let my guard down. A week later, I heard from a neighbor that a woman was attacked while walking near that abandoned site. She was walking home from work in the evening when someone grabbed her and tried to drag her inside. She fought back and screamed, and a passing motorcyclist saw them and stopped, scaring the attacker away. She was bruised but managed to get away alive. The police started patrolling the area after that, and the news spread quickly in the neighborhood. Everyone was talking about it for days. When I heard I woke up before the sun came up. It was still dark outside, and the window in my room was just a silent square of black. I couldn't fall back asleep, even though I was tired. My eyes felt heavy, but my chest felt tight with something I couldn't explain. I lay there listening to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan, thinking about the day ahead. I had to drive out to the construction site early. We were working on laying a new foundation for a small office building near the edge of town. It was the kind of job that took weeks, but paid well if you showed up on time and didn't complain about the heat. I pulled myself out of bed and stood by the window for a minute, looking out into the yard. There wasn't much to see. Just the big tree near the back fence, its branches hanging low, and the grass dark with dew. My boots were by the door where I left them last night. I pulled them on, tied the laces tight, and grabbed my thermos from the kitchen counter. I poured coffee into it, spilling some onto my fingers. The hot splash woke me up a little more. I wiped it on my jeans and left the cup in the sink. Outside, the morning air was cool and smelled of dirt and damp leaves. I unlocked my truck and sat inside for a while with the engine running, letting the heater blow out warm air into the cold cab. The radio was off. I didn't feel like hearing voices or songs this early. I pulled out of the driveway and turned onto the main road. There were no cars yet. The streetlights were still on, casting orange circles of light on the empty asphalt. When I reached the outskirts of town, I turned off the paved road onto the gravel path that led to the site. The tires crunched and rattled on the stones. My headlights lit up the edges of the path where weeds and small bushes grew tall. I drove slow, careful not to hit any hidden dips or potholes. After about 10 minutes, I reached the clearing where the crew usually parked their trucks. No one was there yet. I checked the time on my phone. 5:07 a.m. I was earlier than I thought. I stepped out with my thermos and leaned against the hood of my truck. The sky was slowly turning from black to deep blue, and I could see the shape of the trees at the edge of the clearing. I drank my coffee and tried to enjoy the quiet. I knew it wouldn't last. Soon the other guys would come with their engines roaring, music blasting from open windows, loud greetings that felt like too much noise for mornings like this. I walked around the site a bit. The ground was uneven with packed dirt, rocks, and piles of gravel. Wooden frames were set up for the concrete pours later this week. I checked around to make sure no animals had wandered in overnight. Sometimes stray dogs came in looking for scraps, or raccoons dug around the trash pile. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I noticed a faint trail leading into the woods. I'd seen it before, but never cared to walk down it. It was just a thin path, barely wide enough for a person, winding between the trees. The ground there looked soft and dark with fallen leaves. For some reason that morning, I felt like walking down it. I don't know why. Maybe I just wanted to waste time until the others arrived, or maybe the quiet pulled me in deeper. I stepped onto the trail and moved slowly between the trees. Branches scratched lightly against my jacket. The air felt colder under the thick cover of leaves. I walked for a while, just listening to the crunch of my boots on the fallen leaves and twigs. The smell of wet earth grew stronger. I noticed old tree stumps covered in moss, some fallen branches, and a few animal holes in the ground. Everything felt so still. After about 10 minutes, I came to a small clearing. It wasn't as open as the worksite clearing, but there was enough space to see the pale sky above. In the middle of the clearing, there was an old rusty barrel with black scorch marks around it. Some people must have used it for burning trash or wood. There were empty beer cans and a couple of broken plastic chairs lying on their sides. It looked like the place where teenagers might come at night to drink and smoke. I felt a bit uneasy standing there, like I was stepping into someone else's hidden place. I turned around to head back when I noticed something to my left. It was a shape on the ground near the tree line, half covered by brown leaves. I walked closer and saw that it was a torn blue tarp. It looked dirty and old. Part of it was buried under the damp soil and sticks, but part of it was loose. I felt this sudden strange pull in my chest to see what was under it. I stepped forward and grabbed the edge of the tarp with my gloved hand and pulled. At first it didn't move much. The smell that came out from under it hit me so fast I nearly gagged. It was thick and rotting and sour, like meat that had been left out too long in the sun mixed with the smell of damp soil. I pulled again, using both hands this time, and the tarp flipped back enough for me to see. Underneath was the carcass of a deer, its fur matted and gray, the body sunken in. The ribs showed through the skin, and the eyes were gone. But the thing that made me take a step back was the fact that its legs were tied together with yellow nylon rope. My chest tightened. I just stood there staring at it. The rope was tied in neat knots around all four legs, holding them tight together. Its neck was twisted at a strange angle, and its mouth was open, showing teeth that looked almost human in the dim light. I felt a chill crawl up my back. Someone had done this. This deer didn't just die and end up like this naturally. I stepped back again and nearly tripped over a branch behind me. I turned to leave, feeling a growing panic inside my chest. As I walked back down the trail, my breath came faster. I felt like someone was watching me from between the trees. The quiet no longer felt peaceful. It felt heavy and dangerous. I kept thinking about the rope. Why would anyone tie up a deer like that? My boots crunched loud on the path. I felt exposed, like I was making too much noise in a place where something else was moving quietly, listening. When I reached the clearing of the worksite again, I saw 2 trucks pulling in. The guys were getting out, stretching, laughing about something. I walked up to them and forced myself to act normal. Inside, I felt sick. My stomach hurt, and the smell of that rotting deer seemed to cling to my clothes and hair. The sun was up now, and the world looked normal again, but my chest still felt tight. All day, while we worked, I kept thinking about that deer. Every time I looked at the tree line, I felt a cold spot in my chest. During lunch break, I walked to the far edge of the clearing and looked down the trail again. I could see the shadows between the trees, dark and silent. I felt eyes there, watching, waiting. I didn't eat much that day. After work, the others left in their trucks, honking and waving as they drove off. I stayed behind, saying I needed to check some of the tools and lock up the storage shed. When they were gone, I stood alone in the quiet evening light. The sun was low, painting the trees in orange and gold, but the trail and trance looked almost black in the fading light. I don't know what made me go back down there. Maybe it was fear mixed with curiosity, or maybe it was that same pull I felt in the morning. I grabbed my heavy flashlight from the truck and walked down the trail again. Each step felt heavier than the last. The trees seemed closer together this time, like they were closing in around me. The smell hit me before I even reached the clearing. That thick rotting smell, stronger than before. When I stepped into the small clearing, I shone my light towards the tarp. My breath caught in my throat. The deer was gone. The tarp was still there, crumpled and dark with dirt, but the carcass was gone. The ropes were lying in a pile next to it, wet with black stains. I scanned the area with my flashlight, moving the beam slowly from tree to tree. The chairs were still there, the barrel still standing. But there was something new. In the soft dirt near the tarp, there were footprints. Bare feet, large with long toes. The prints were fresh, pressed deep into the wet ground, and they led into the trees. My chest felt tight with fear. I turned off the flashlight for a second and just listened. The forest was silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, no birds. Just silence. I turned the light back on and looked down at the footprints again. The edges were sharp and clear. They were real. I stood there frozen for what felt like forever, staring at those prints leading away from where the dead deer had been. Then I turned and ran. I didn't care about noise anymore. I ran down the trail, branches slapping against my arms and face, my boots slipping on the damp ground. My breath came in hard gasps. I reached the worksite clearing and didn't stop running until I was inside my truck with the doors locked. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. When the engine started, I reversed too fast, almost hitting a pile of gravel. I turned onto the gravel path and drove back to the main road, my tires spitting out rocks behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, staring at the window. Every shadow outside looked like it was moving. My mind kept going back to the footprints. The deer tied up with rope, left under a tarp. Then gone, with footprints walking away. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't want to know. But I knew one thing for sure. Someone was out there. Someone who could carry a dead deer on their shoulders and walk barefoot through the forest without making a sound. The next morning, I called in sick. I told them I had food poisoning. I sat at the kitchen table drinking cold coffee and staring at my phone, wondering if I should call the police. But what would I say? That I found a tied-up deer that disappeared overnight? That there were large barefoot prints leading away into the forest? They would think I was crazy, or worse, they would think I was trying to cover something up. I spent the whole day inside, barely moving from the chair. The sun rose and fell, and shadows moved across my walls. When darkness came again, I closed all the blinds and locked every window. I sat in the quiet, listening for any sound. I woke up before sunrise that day. The air felt heavy when I stepped out of my room. The hallway was dark, and I could hear the fridge humming in the kitchen. I put on my shoes, grabbed my old backpack, and walked out the front door as quietly as I could. The sky was dark blue, almost black, and the streetlights were still on. I had decided to go for a long walk in the countryside, far past the edge of town, to clear my head. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, because I felt like being alone for the day. I felt restless, and my chest felt tight since last night. I thought walking under the open sky would help me calm down. I crossed the empty road and walked down towards the fields. The first birds were waking up. Their sounds felt soft in the cold morning. I kept my head down as I walked through the dew-covered grass. My shoes were soaked within 10 minutes, but I didn't care. I just kept going. I climbed over an old wooden fence into a cow pasture and walked along the fence line. The ground was uneven with hidden holes and patches of thick mud that sucked at my shoes. As the sun started rising, a golden line spread across the horizon, and I felt a little better seeing the light. I walked for almost an hour without stopping. My legs felt strong, and the cold wind on my face felt good. I reached the edge of the pasture, where a dense line of trees stood like a black wall. This was the start of a large forest that spread out for miles. People often went there for hunting or camping, but I didn't plan to go deep inside. I just wanted to walk along the edge and maybe sit by the trees for a while before heading back. I climbed through a gap in the barbed wire and stepped onto the thick layer of fallen pine needles and dry leaves. The smell of trees, wet earth, and moss was strong in the cool air. I walked along a faint trail covered in sticks and old leaves. Birds flew overhead, making the branches sway. I kept my head down, watching the ground to avoid twisted roots and holes. The forest felt empty. I liked that feeling. It was peaceful in a way. After walking for a while, I sat down on a fallen tree trunk. It was damp and covered in patches of green moss. I put down my backpack, took out my water bottle, and drank slowly. I watched the sun filtering through the trees, making patterns on the ground that shifted with the wind. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the wind and birds. Then I heard a sound behind me. It was soft, like a footstep on leaves. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just trees and bushes. I waited, listening hard, but I heard nothing else. I felt my chest tighten again, but I told myself it was just a squirrel or a bird hopping on the ground. I picked up my backpack and started walking again, deeper into the trees this time. The trail became rough and uneven. I stepped over fallen branches and ducked under hanging dead vines. After about 15 minutes, I reached a place where the trees opened up into a small clearing. The grass here was long and wild, mixed with thorn bushes and nettles. In the center of the clearing, there was an old rusted water tank lying on its side. It looked like it had been there for decades. Plants had started to grow around and inside it. I walked up to it and touched the cold metal surface. My fingertips left streaks in the thick layer of dirt. I felt a strange chill even though the sun was shining on my face. I decided to sit down again, leaning against the water tank. I took out a small sandwich I had packed, but I didn't feel hungry anymore. I put it back and drank some water instead. The clearing was silent except for the wind moving the long grass. Then I heard another sound. This time it was clear, the sound of dry grass being crushed underfoot. I held my breath and listened carefully. It came from the other side of the water tank, maybe 15 feet away. My stomach tightened, and I felt my skin go cold. I turned my head slowly, but I couldn't see past the curve of the tank. I stood up quietly, trying not to make any noise. My legs felt shaky. I didn't know why I felt so afraid, but something about the sound felt wrong. It didn't sound like an animal. I slowly walked around the tank, keeping my steps as light as I could. When I reached the other side, there was nothing there. Just the tall grass swaying in the wind. I stood there, staring at the grass, waiting for another sound. Then I noticed something that made my heart pound harder. In the grass, there was a narrow, flattened path, like someone had walked through it just now. The path disappeared into the trees on the other side of the clearing. I felt my mouth go dry. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight. I stood there for what felt like minutes, staring at that path. Finally, I decided I didn't want to be here anymore. I turned and walked back towards the trail I had come from. My hands were sweating even though the wind was cold. I kept looking over my shoulder as I walked. The feeling that someone was there stayed with me the whole time. When I reached the trail, I started walking faster. My steps crunched on the fallen leaves and twigs, and each sound felt too loud in the silent forest. After walking for about 5 minutes, I realized something was wrong. The trees around me didn't look familiar. The trail seemed wider, and there were no fallen logs like the ones I had stepped over earlier. I stopped and looked around. My chest felt tight again, and my breathing became quick and shallow. I turned around to go back the way I came, but after a few steps I saw nothing familiar. Every direction looked the same, dark trees, thorn bushes, and patches of light from the sun. I felt panic rising in my chest. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself to think clearly. I decided to keep walking in one direction. I picked a spot where the sun was shining through the trees and headed that way, thinking it would eventually lead me out of the forest. As I walked, the ground became rougher. There were thick roots sticking out and holes hidden under dead leaves. At one point, my foot slipped into a hole and I fell forward, scraping my knee and the palm of my hand on a sharp rock. The pain shot up my leg and arm, but I didn't stop. I got up quickly, brushing dirt and dried leaves off my jeans, and kept walking. My breathing was loud in my ears, and my heartbeat felt like it was shaking my whole body. I walked for what felt like half an hour without seeing anything that looked familiar. The sun had moved higher, and I could feel its heat on my back. I felt sweat running down my neck, and my shirt was sticking to my skin. I stopped to drink water, but my bottle was almost empty. I put it back in my bag and kept walking, pushing through thorn bushes that scratched my arms and caught on my clothes. My jeans were covered in dust and small pieces of dry grass. After a while, I saw something ahead, a small slope with scattered rocks leading down into a narrow ditch. I walked down carefully, hoping it might lead to a path or an open area. At the bottom of the ditch, there was thick mud. My shoes sank in, making sucking noises as I pulled each foot out. The smell of wet earth and rotting plants was strong. I struggled through it, grabbing onto tree roots to keep from falling. When I climbed out the other side, my legs were covered in dark brown mud up to my knees. I sat down on a dry patch of ground to catch my breath. My legs were shaking, and my hands were trembling. I felt like crying, but I held it in. I looked around and tried to listen for any sound of cars or voices, but all I heard was the wind and distant birds. I forced myself to get up again and kept walking. My mind felt foggy, and my legs felt heavy. Every step felt harder than the last. My stomach growled, but I didn't feel hungry, just sick and tired. Suddenly, I heard a noise to my right, a low rustling sound in the bushes. My heart jumped, and I froze in place. The rustling grew louder, like something big was moving through the undergrowth. I stood completely still, staring at the bushes. My mouth felt dry as sand. Then I saw movement, branches bending and leaves shaking. I backed away slowly, trying not to make noise. My feet crunched on the dry twigs, and the noise in the bushes stopped for a second, then started again, this time moving towards me. I turned and ran. My shoes slipped on the loose dirt and leaves. I could hear the sound behind me getting closer, branches breaking, leaves rustling, something heavy moving fast. My lungs burned with each breath, and my chest felt like it was about to burst. I didn't look back. I just ran, dodging trees and jumping over fallen branches. My backpack bounced against my back with each step, and the straps dug into my shoulders. After what felt like forever, I burst out of the trees into another clearing. I stopped, gasping for air, and looked around quickly. This clearing was smaller than the last one, with shorter grass and a few scattered rocks. The sound behind me had stopped. The forest was silent again, except for my ragged breathing. I bent over, resting my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. Sweat dripped from my forehead onto the dusty ground. I stood up straight and looked around. At the far end of the clearing, I saw something that made my chest fill with hope. There was an old wooden fence running along the tree line. Beyond it, I could see the open field and far in the distance, a road. I felt tears fill my eyes. I ran towards the fence, stumbling over rocks and roots. When I reached it, I grabbed the top rail and pulled myself over. My muddy shoes slipped, and I scraped my shin on the rough wood, but I didn't care. I landed on the other side, almost falling, but I kept my balance. I stood in the open field, breathing hard, looking back at the dark trees. The sun was high now, and the heat felt strong on my skin. My clothes were covered in mud, dirt, and sweat. My arms were scratched and bleeding in places. I stood there for a while, feeling the breeze on my face, feeling the open sky above me. I turned and started walking towards the road, feeling my legs shaking with every step. I woke up that morning feeling heavy and slow. My body didn't want to move from the bed, but I had to get up because I was supposed to meet my friend Jason for a run around the lake. I sat on the edge of my bed, rubbing my eyes for a while, trying to wake up properly. My room felt stuffy and warm, so I opened the window. Outside, the sky was cloudy and gray, and the air smelled damp, like it might rain later. I didn't want to run, but I knew I had to. I pulled on my old black joggers and a plain white t-shirt, grabbed my running shoes from under the bed, and put them on. I looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was messy, and I had dark circles under my eyes, but I didn't care. I tied my laces, grabbed my phone and headphones, and went downstairs. The house was quiet. My parents were already at work, and my little brother was still sleeping. I drank a glass of water, then left the house. The air outside felt cool and heavy, and the wind carried a damp smell of dirt and grass. I put my headphones on, played some music, and walked to the corner where Jason always waited. But when I got there, he wasn't there. I checked my phone and saw a message from him saying he couldn't come because he was feeling sick. I stood there for a while, thinking about going back home, but then I thought I should run anyway since I was already out. I crossed the street and walked down the path leading to the lake. The lake was surrounded by trees, thick and dark even in daylight. The path circled the whole lake, and parts of it went through the woods. I walked for a bit to warm up, feeling the gravel crunch under my shoes, then started jogging. My breathing felt heavy at first, but after a few minutes, I found a rhythm. I passed a couple walking their dog. The dog barked at me, but I didn't pay attention. The sky was getting darker, and I thought it might rain soon, so I decided to run faster to finish before the rain started. I ran past the wooden benches near the old dock, past the fishing spot where an old man always sat on weekends. Today it was empty. The wind picked up, and I could hear the leaves rustling above me. A few birds flew out from the trees, making loud flapping sounds. I kept running, feeling sweat roll down my neck and back. My breathing was getting harder, but I didn't stop. The woods felt quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that felt thick and heavy, like the trees were listening. I reached the part of the path that went deeper into the woods. This part was always darker because the trees blocked the sun. The ground here was covered in damp leaves and fallen branches. I slowed down a little because the path was uneven and slippery in places. I could hear my breathing loud in my ears and my shoes crunching the leaves. The smell of wet earth was strong here, mixed with the smell of old rotting wood. As I ran further in, I felt something strange, like someone was watching me. I looked around quickly, but didn't see anyone. I kept running, but the feeling didn't go away. My heart was beating fast, and not just from running. I started to hear something behind me. At first, it sounded like an echo of my own footsteps, but after a few seconds, I realized it was something else. It was heavier, slower, and it didn't match my steps. I turned my head slightly and saw movement between the trees. My stomach twisted. I kept running, trying not to look back again. The sound of footsteps behind me got louder, and I could hear sticks snapping under heavy weight. I ran faster, but I felt like my legs were filled with lead. My breath was burning my chest, and my vision was shaking with every step. The footsteps behind me didn't stop. I could hear breathing too deep and heavy, like whoever it was had strong lungs or was pushing themselves hard. I reached the wooden bridge that crossed a small stream. I ran over it without looking down. The footsteps were closer now, and my fear turned into panic. I forced my legs to move faster, even though my body was screaming to stop. The path curved sharply to the left, and as I turned, I risked a quick glance back. Between the trees, I saw a person, but only for a second. They were wearing dark clothes, maybe black or dark brown, and they were tall. I couldn't see their face. The branches blocked parts of their body, but I could see their arms pumping as they ran after me. My body went cold. I ran as fast as I could. My feet slipped on the wet leaves, and I almost fell, but I kept going. My lungs felt like they were tearing open, and my legs were burning. I could hear them gaining on me, the snapping of sticks louder and closer. The path here was narrow, with thorn bushes on both sides. Branches scratched my arms, and thorns caught on my shirt, tearing small holes in it. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. I knew there was a small clearing ahead, a place where people sometimes stopped to rest. I aimed for it, hoping that if I reached an open area, I could see better or find a stick or rock to defend myself. When I reached the clearing, I stopped and turned around, breathing hard. But there was no one there. The path behind me was empty. The trees stood still, and everything was silent except for my ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. I stood there, bent over, trying to catch my breath, listening carefully for any sound. The only thing I heard was a distant bird call and the wind rustling the leaves high above. My legs were shaking, and I felt sick. I waited for a minute, staring into the trees, expecting to see them step out any second. But nothing moved. I felt sweat dripping down my back, and my shirt was sticking to my skin. I looked around the clearing. It was just a small open space with a couple of fallen logs and some large rocks covered in moss. The ground was covered with old dry leaves and pine needles. There were no signs of anyone. My breathing was slowing down a little, but I still felt shaky. I thought about calling someone, but I didn't want to sound stupid if it was just my imagination. I checked my phone. There was no signal here. I put it back in my pocket and started walking towards the exit of the woods. I didn't want to run anymore. My body felt drained, and I felt dizzy. As I walked, I kept turning my head to look behind me. Every shadow looked like a person hiding. Every branch snapping under a falling pine cone made my heart jump into my throat. The feeling of being watched didn't go away. It felt like eyes were following me from the trees, moving with me, always staying just out of sight. After what felt like forever, I reached the edge of the woods where the path opened back to the lake. I walked quickly towards the main road, my breathing still uneven. I kept looking back over my shoulder, expecting to see them emerge from the trees. But no one did. The lake looked calm, the water dark under the cloudy sky. A few ducks were floating near the reeds, and the wind was making small ripples on the surface. I stood there for a while, staring at the lake, trying to calm myself down. I started walking home, feeling the sweat dry on my skin, making me feel cold and sticky. My legs felt weak, and my chest still hurt from breathing so hard. When I finally reached my street, I felt a bit safer, but the feeling of being watched still followed me like a shadow. I walked up to my house, unlocked the door, and went inside. The quiet felt comforting for a moment. I took off my shoes and went straight to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, and my skin looked pale. I went to my room, closed the curtains, and sat on my bed. My body was shaking a little, and I felt cold. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat there for a long time, listening to the sound of the ceiling fan. I kept thinking about what I saw in the woods. I tried to tell myself that it was just another runner, someone who happened to be there at the same time. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. They weren't running on the path. They were moving between the trees, keeping to the shadows, and their footsteps were heavy, not like someone out for a jog. Later that day, when my parents came home, I didn't tell them anything. I didn't want them to worry or tell me not to run there again. I just stayed quiet, eating dinner without tasting anything, nodding when they asked me questions about my day. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure between the trees, running after me. I kept hearing the footsteps in my head, getting closer and closer. The next morning, I woke up feeling tired and scared. I decided not to go running that day. I spent the morning cleaning my room, trying to keep my mind busy. But around noon, I started feeling restless. I kept thinking about what happened and wondering if I had imagined it. Part of me wanted to go back there to prove to myself that it was nothing. So I put on my shoes again, grabbed a jacket this time because it was colder, and left the house. I walked slowly towards the lake, feeling my stomach twist with every step. When I reached the path, I stood there for a while, looking at the entrance to the woods. It looked the same as always, dark and quiet. I took a deep breath and started walking. The path felt different today. The trees looked darker, and the shadows looked deeper. Every sound felt louder, like the woods were amplifying it. My footsteps crunched on the gravel, and birds chirped somewhere high above. I walked past the benches, past the dock, and towards the part where the path went deeper into the woods. My chest felt tight, and my breathing was shallow. I walked slowly, looking around carefully. The smell of wet earth was strong again, mixed with pine and old leaves. I reached the clearing where I had stopped yesterday. I stood there, looking around. Everything was quiet. I didn't see any footprints or broken branches, nothing to prove that someone was there yesterday. I walked around the clearing, checking the ground, but it was just leaves, dirt, and small plants. My heart was beating fast, and my hands felt cold. I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet. I could hear a woodpecker tapping somewhere in the distance, and the wind moving through the tops of the trees. I woke up before my alarm that day. The sky outside my window was still dark, with a hint of deep blue pushing through the blackness. I sat up in bed for a while, listening to the quietness of the room. My fan made its low humming sound in the corner, and the air felt cool against my bare arms. I rubbed my face and checked my phone. It was just past 4:30 a.m. I knew I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep, so I decided to start the day early. I got up slowly, stretching my legs, feeling the stiffness in my lower back. I walked barefoot to the bathroom, flicked on the light, and splashed water onto my face. My eyes were puffy with sleep. I leaned against the sink for a moment, staring at myself in the mirror. The fluorescent bulb buzzed softly above. I brushed my teeth and rinsed my mouth, trying to wash away that early morning taste that always left me feeling a bit sick. I changed into my dark green hiking pants and an old gray t-shirt. It had small holes near the collar. I tied my boots tightly, making sure the laces wouldn't come undone on the trail. As I tied them, I could hear the faint creaking of the wooden floor under me. I grabbed my thick black hoodie from the hook near my bedroom door. Even in summer, the early mornings were cold in these mountains. I filled my water bottle and slipped it into the side pocket of my worn-out backpack. Inside, I packed a granola bar, a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in foil, and 2 bananas. I placed my phone in the small front pouch with my car keys and wallet. As I picked up the bag, it felt heavier than usual, probably because I had also packed my old film camera, hoping to take some sunrise shots at the top of the ridge. I stepped outside into the dawn air. The sky was now lighter, turning into a faded navy color, and the street lamps still glowed orange. The neighborhood was silent. No cars, no people, just a few birds waking up somewhere far off. I locked my front door and checked it twice. I always do that before leaving, even if it's just for a walk. I walked down the concrete steps, feeling the cold through the thin soles of my boots, and unlocked my car. The door hinges squeaked softly as I opened it. I started the car, and the old engine shook under the hood. The radio came on automatically. It was playing some ad about insurance, so I turned it off. I preferred silence in the morning. I pulled out of my driveway slowly, checking both sides of the empty road out of habit, and drove down the familiar street lined with dark houses. Some porch lights were still on. A few windows glowed dimly with the light of early risers. The drive to the trailhead took about 40 minutes. It was mostly empty two-lane roads winding through small forested areas and open fields with tall grass. The sun began to rise slowly behind me, turning the sky orange and pink. As I drove, I saw a few deer grazing near the road. One of them lifted its head and looked at me as I passed. Its big black eyes reflected my headlights, and I could see its ears flicking back and forth. I reached the trailhead parking lot just before 5:30 a.m. There were no other cars there yet, which felt good. I liked having the trail to myself. I turned off the engine and sat there for a minute, listening to it tick softly as it cooled. The air outside looked misty, with thin white fog resting over the tops of bushes and between the trees. I pulled my hoodie tighter around me and grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat. When I stepped out, the cold air bit at my face and hands. It felt fresh and clean, though, in a way that made my chest feel open. I locked the car, checked my bag straps, and started walking towards the beginning of the trail. The entrance was marked by an old wooden sign with the trail name carved into it. The paint was chipped away from years of weather. The dirt path was covered in dry leaves and pine needles, making soft crunching sounds under my boots. The trees around me were tall pines, their tops fading into the morning mist. I could smell the earthy scent of wet soil, pine resin, and old leaves rotting under the surface. As I walked, I felt the muscles in my legs start to warm up. The trail began with a slight incline that always made my calves ache. I moved slowly, not rushing myself. I liked to look around while I walked. To my left, the forest floor sloped down into a shallow ravine filled with ferns and fallen branches. To my right, the land rose steeply, dotted with rocks and small bushes. There was a soft wind moving through the treetops, making them sway and creak. Once in a while, a small twig or pine cone would fall somewhere behind me, making a faint thud against the ground. About half an hour in, I stopped to drink some water. I took off my backpack and leaned against a large rock. I could feel the rough, cold surface through the back of my shirt. I unscrewed the cap of my water bottle and took a long sip. The water was still cold from sitting in the fridge overnight. I looked around while I drank. The forest was getting brighter as the sun came up, and small rays of golden light were breaking through the trees, lighting up the fog like smoke. I could hear a woodpecker tapping away somewhere far off. Small brown birds flitted between low bushes, chirping quietly to each other. I saw a squirrel sitting on a broken log, nibbling on something it held between its tiny paws. It looked at me for a moment before darting off into the undergrowth. I finished drinking and wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. I felt a bit of sweat on my neck, even though the air was still cool. I put the bottle back in my bag and started walking again, feeling the straps rub against my shoulders. The trail curved to the left and began to climb more steeply. The ground here was covered in loose rocks, and I had to watch my steps carefully. My boots slipped a little on the smoother stones, making my heart jump each time I lost balance for a second. About 10 minutes later, I reached a section where the trail narrowed and dropped off sharply to the left. The edge was only about 2 feet wide, with loose gravel on top, and I could see the hillside falling away into the trees below. I moved slowly here, placing each foot firmly before taking the next step. My breathing was loud in my ears, and my palms felt sweaty as I held onto a small branch sticking out of the dirt wall beside me. When I passed that section, the trail widened again and leveled out a bit. I felt my chest relax, and I stopped to catch my breath. I looked down at the valley below. The fog was rising now, moving like slow water through the trees. I could see the tops of pines poking out, and the sun lit everything in a golden glow. It was beautiful in a quiet, lonely way. I kept walking for another hour, slowly winding my way up towards the ridge. The forest changed as I climbed higher. The trees were thinner, and there were more rocks and exposed roots. I started to feel hungry, so I stopped again to eat my sandwich. I sat on a flat rock under a crooked pine tree. The foil crinkled loudly as I unwrapped the sandwich, and the smell of peanut butter made my stomach growl. I ate slowly, chewing each bite carefully, feeling the dry bread stick a bit to the roof of my mouth. I drank some more water to wash it down. After eating, I packed up my trash and stood up, brushing dirt and small pine needles off the back of my pants. I stretched my arms over my head, feeling my shoulders pop and crack. The sun was high enough now to make the air feel warmer, and I unzipped my hoodie halfway. I walked on, feeling more awake after eating. About half an hour later, I heard something strange ahead of me on the trail. It was like a soft scraping sound mixed with rustling leaves. I stopped walking and listened carefully. The sound stopped too. I stood still, holding my breath. Then it started again, but this time it was closer. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the ground. I felt a cold tightness in my chest. I looked around but couldn't see anything through the trees. The sound continued, slow and steady, then stopped again. I stayed still for what felt like minutes, listening. Everything else was silent. No birds, no wind, just complete stillness. I started walking again, slower this time, placing each foot softly on the ground to avoid making noise. My ears felt hot, and my heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. As I turned a small bend in the trail, I saw something that made my stomach twist. There was a man standing about 30 feet ahead, just off the trail. He was facing away from me, leaning over something on the ground. His clothes were dark and dirty, and his hair was long and matted. I could see his shoulders moving slightly, like he was breathing hard or working on something. The scraping sound came again, and I realized it was him dragging a long branch or stick across the dirt. I froze. My legs felt weak, and I felt a sharp, cold feeling in my chest. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, watching him, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. He didn't turn around. He just kept dragging the branch, then dropping it, then dragging it again. I slowly stepped backwards, making sure not to step on any twigs. I moved off the trail a bit, hiding behind a thick pine tree. My hands were shaking so badly I could feel my fingers twitching against the rough bark. I peeked out again to look at him. He was still there, moving in the same way, like he was stuck in a loop. I knew I couldn't go forward. I also didn't want to go back down the trail because it would take me past him again. I thought about waiting it out, but I didn't know how long he would stay there. My mind felt hot and dizzy. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow. I decided to move off the trail completely and cut across through the trees to rejoin the path further up. It wasn't safe, but I couldn't think of anything else. I tightened my backpack straps and started moving slowly through the undergrowth, stepping over fallen branches and ducking under low pine limbs. The ground was uneven, filled with hidden rocks and roots. Every step felt like it might make noise. I woke up earlier than usual that morning, around 5. The sun wasn't up yet. The house was quiet, and the air felt cold against my face. I sat up in bed and felt a stiffness in my back. I'd been sleeping wrong lately, maybe because of the old mattress, or maybe just stress from work. My room smelled like dust and old wood. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the kitchen, even from my room. I rubbed my face and sat there for a while, staring at the dark wall in front of me. I didn't want to get up, but I had promised myself I would go for a walk today. I'd been feeling heavy in my chest for the past few weeks. Everything felt stuck. Work was boring. Life was boring. I felt like I was just existing to finish the day and sleep. So I thought I should get out early before anyone woke up, just walk deep into the forest that started behind my house. Maybe I would feel better after a long walk in the trees, breathing in the cold morning air. I put on my old faded jeans, a gray hoodie, and my worn-out black trainers. They had holes on the sides near my toes. I didn't care. I just wanted to get going before the sun came up. I didn't even eat breakfast. I drank some water straight from the jug and stepped out the back door. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath. It smelled like wet dirt and pine trees. I locked the door behind me out of habit, even though no one ever came this way. I walked across the small patch of grass behind my house. There was an old broken-down swing, set leaning to one side. Its chains were rusty, and it squeaked every time the wind blew hard. I passed it and stepped onto the narrow dirt path that led into the forest. The trees here were tall pines, close together so only thin strips of dawn light came through. The forest floor was covered with dry brown needles and fallen branches. I could hear the crunch under my shoes with every step. A crow cawed somewhere deep in the trees, and the sound echoed back to me like a warning. I walked for about 15 minutes before I started to feel awake. My legs warmed up. My arms were tucked inside the hoodie pocket to keep my hands warm. The path kept getting narrower until it almost disappeared, but I knew this forest. I'd grown up here. I used to come here with my dad when I was a kid to collect pine cones and look for deer tracks. Back then it felt like an adventure. Now it felt more like I was looking for something I had lost. I kept walking further in, deeper than I'd ever gone alone. The trees grew closer, and their trunks looked darker and older here. Some had thick moss climbing up their sides. I passed a large fallen tree that was almost hollow inside. I stopped to look in it, half expecting to see an animal curled up asleep. It was empty except for some brown leaves and dirt clumped together. I could hear small scratching sounds coming from somewhere inside the log, but I didn't see anything move. I walked on. The forest started to slope down into a small valley. The ground was soft and damp here. My shoes sank in a little with each step. I smelled something rotten, like dead plants mixed with stagnant water. The trees opened up into a small clearing, maybe 10 meters across. In the middle was a shallow pond covered in dark green scum. The water looked thick. I walked up to the edge and stood there for a moment, staring at it. A faint mist hovered above the surface, moving slowly with the breeze. It felt colder here. The smell was worse too. I stepped back and decided to keep walking. I walked along the edge of the pond until I reached the other side of the clearing where the trees closed back in. The path wasn't clear anymore. There were fallen branches and thorny bushes blocking the way, but I pushed through them. The thorns scratched my jeans, and one scraped the back of my hand. A thin line of blood appeared, but I didn't feel any pain. I wiped it on my hoodie and kept moving forward. As I walked, I started to feel like I was being watched. Every time I stopped to listen, I heard nothing but the faint rustle of leaves above me. But when I started walking again, I thought I heard soft cracks behind me, like someone stepping on dry twigs. I stopped again and turned around. There was nothing there, just dark trees standing silent, their branches hanging like long, thin arms. I kept going deeper, thinking maybe it was just an animal following me, maybe a fox or a stray dog. I tried to ignore it. The ground here was uneven, and I kept tripping over small rocks hidden under the thick layer of pine needles. My shoes were wet now. I could feel the cold dampness seeping into my socks. I started to regret not bringing water or even my phone, but it was too late to turn back now. I told myself I'd keep going for a bit more, and then turn around before it got bright. Suddenly the trees thinned out again, and I found myself on the edge of another clearing. This one was much larger, almost like a meadow, but there were no flowers or grass here. Just dirt and old dry leaves. In the middle of the clearing was a small shack. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. The wooden walls were gray and rotting. The roof sagged in the middle. There was no door, just an empty doorway leading into darkness. I stood there staring at it for a long time. I felt like I shouldn't go in. Something about it felt wrong, like it was rotting from the inside. But curiosity got the better of me. I stepped forward, careful not to make too much noise, even though the ground here was covered in dry, brittle leaves that cracked under my feet. As I reached the doorway, I paused. The smell coming out of the shack was thick and damp, like old moldy blankets left out in the rain. I held my breath and stepped inside. The inside was dark and small. The roof was low enough that I had to crouch a little. The walls were covered in old peeling wallpaper with faded green flower patterns. There was a broken wooden chair in the corner, half sunk into the dirt floor. Next to it was a pile of old rags that looked like they had once been clothes. There were empty cans scattered around, rusted through with holes. In the far corner, I saw what looked like a small mattress. It was torn open, and the stuffing was spilling out. It was covered in dark stains. I didn't want to think about what they were. As I looked around, I noticed the smell was strongest near the mattress. I stepped closer and saw that the dirt floor dipped down into a shallow hole next to it. Something shiny caught my eye in the hole. I crouched down and saw an old silver spoon, blackened with age. There was also a small metal box, half buried. I reached down and pulled it out. The box was cold and heavy. I opened it, and inside were old coins, some buttons, and a small pocket knife. The blade was rusty but still sharp at the edge. I closed the box and put it back. I didn't want to take anything from here. I stood up and backed away from the mattress. The smell was making me feel sick now. I turned to leave, but as I stepped towards the door, I heard a low rustling sound behind me. I froze. My skin felt tight against my bones. I turned my head slowly and saw the pile of rags shift slightly. I couldn't tell if it was just a rat inside or something else. I didn't want to find out. I walked quickly out the door and stepped back into the clearing. The morning light had grown stronger. The sky was turning a dull gray, but the sun was still hidden behind the trees. I felt like I needed to leave. Something in my chest felt heavy, like a stone pressing down on my lungs. I turned back towards the path I had come from, but I realized I couldn't see it anymore. The trees all looked the same. There was no clear trail. My throat went dry. I tried to remember the direction I had walked in, so I picked a spot between two thick pine trunks and started walking towards it, hoping I was going the right way. As I moved deeper back into the trees, I felt the ground become softer again. The smell of damp earth filled my nose. I walked faster, my shoes slipping in the mud. I kept looking back, feeling like something was behind me, just out of sight. Every now and then I thought I saw a dark shape between the trees, but when I stopped to look properly, there was nothing there. My heart was beating so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I walked for what felt like hours. The forest was silent, except for the sound of my breathing and my footsteps on the soft ground. My legs started to ache. My socks were soaked, and every step felt cold and squishy. I kept moving forward, trying to find anything familiar. Then I saw a tree with a deep cut in the bark. I recognized it. I had carved my initials there when I was a teenager. Relief washed over me. I knew I was close to home now. I walked past that tree, and soon I found the narrow path again. It felt like my chest loosened. I walked as fast as I could back towards the house. When I finally stepped out of the forest, the sky was bright gray. The sun was hidden behind thick clouds. The swing set stood there, unmoving in the still morning. I walked up to the back door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. The warmth of the house hit me instantly. My legs felt weak. I sat down on the floor and took off my wet shoes and socks. My feet were white and wrinkled from the cold dampness. I looked down at my hands. The cut on the back of my hand had dried up, but the skin around it was red and swollen. I didn't care. I just sat there on the cold kitchen tiles, staring at the wall, trying to calm my breathing. I didn't know what I had felt in the forest. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just tired and scared from being alone for so long in the dark trees. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back there alone again. I got up, washed my hands, and made myself some tea. As I sat by the small window in my kitchen, looking out at the trees swaying slightly in the morning breeze, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The forest was quiet now. It looked peaceful from here, like nothing bad could ever happen in there. But I knew the truth. I knew what it felt like to stand among those silent, dark trees and feel something watching you. I knew what it felt like to be so alone that even your own heartbeat sounded like footsteps